School Board regular meeting will be called to order at 5 p.m. in the boardroom of the Learning Resource Center. Can you take roll to determine a quorum?
Buckholz. Maury.
Here.
Nelson.
Here.
Rollinger.
Here.
Walker.
Here.
Wall.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Quorum is present at 5 o'clock.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
I move to adopt the agenda with the removal of number 704.
Second.
Motion by Sandra, second by Matt. And I will be saying that for clarity because we have a different note taker tonight, just so you know why I'm saying your names. Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. We have an agenda. At this time, I would like to open time for public hearing on the Excelsior parking lot project, the stadium turf replacement project, and the 2022-23 school year calendar. So if anyone has comments on either of any of these three topics, now would be the time to speak. Okay. Hearing none, seeing none, I will close the public hearing on those three topics. At this time, the board invites the public to speak on items related to the agenda or district. The board will receive and acknowledge comments, but will not engage in a dialogue with the speaker because of the set agenda for the meeting. Remarks are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Remarks should not contain names or identifying information about students, teachers, administrators, or other personnel. For additional information on audience participation during board meetings, please visit policy 204.9 at the Linn-Mar website. At this time, I would open anyone who has comments that would like to share with us this evening.
All right.
Please state your name.
My name's Aaron Grandin. 2 of my children attend Bowman Woods Elementary School. I want to start by saying that I appreciate what you do. This board and the previous members of the board have navigated uncharted waters for the last couple of years. You've made many difficult and sometimes unpopular decisions. But overall, I believe the board has tried to do what's best for the students, schools, and staff, which is why I'm here today. I respect that the board honored their previous commitment to end the mask requirement 60 days after vaccination was available for 5 to 12-year-olds. However, I personally believe that decision was short-sighted. The Omicron variant was not known at the time of the decision, but is now prevalent in our community, and even though some of the kids in the district are vaccinated, there are plenty who are not and cannot be vaccinated. I have a 4-year-old son in preschool in the district. He's not yet eligible for vaccination. He also has persistent asthma, which flares up when his body encounters respiratory viruses. This usually results in him waking up in the middle of the night, struggling to breathe. He's been to the ER 5 times in the last 3 years due to this. I recognize this is a personal problem, but I ask the board to consider those who are unable to be vaccinated. As far as I know, no one on this board is a trained medical professional, virologist, epidemiologist, or public health expert by education or experience. I don't expect the members on this board to be able to form their own conclusions on what is right relating to those fields, which is why I ask and request that the board rely on the expertise and the knowledge of tens of thousands of doctors at the American Academy of Pediatrics and the experts of public health at the CDC. Those professionals recommend masks in schools when community transmission is high. Some will argue that masks are not effective and that while they are not 100% effective, they are all effective to some degree. They're another valuable tool when layered with other prevention techniques that will help prevent the spread of COVID within our schools and communities. One thing I think we can all agree on is that we're very tired of COVID. I urge this board not to grow weary of doing what is right. What is right doesn't change just because we're fatigued. According to the district's website, the case count within Linn-Mar schools has risen 200 to 300% since before the holiday break. Masks are what is right at this point in time. The Cedar Rapids School District has a metrics-based approach for their mask requirement. I encourage this board to review their approach and adopt something very similar based on county and district COVID rates. This is not a political issue, it is a public health issue. I don't want kids to wear masks forever. I just want them to be able to keep attending school in person. I want them to receive the best education they can. I want them safe while they're there, and I don't want our teachers and staff overwhelmed by COVID while they try to educate our kids. Our state and district already have a hard time attracting and retaining teachers. I encourage you to help those potential candidates feel safe coming to work in our district. Our community is suffering. Our hospitals are overwhelmed. Please help our community, your staff, and your students by doing what is within your ability to prevent the spread of COVID. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else that would like to speak this evening? Okay.
My name is Barbara Johnson. I have 4 children in this district. I'm going to try to make this really kind of short and sweet, but it's been made very apparent by a lot of members on this board that you guys don't want to do your job. You don't want to answer emails. You don't want to answer questions. There's been maybe 1 to 2 people consistently doing what they've been asked and signed on for. It's really hard as a parent to send your kids to school when you can't trust that they're going to school to be educated, that teachers aren't walking out and not teaching their classes because of things that don't belong during educational hours. I can't trust a board that's going to talk about ponies as what? Service animals in our school? Something ridiculous like that? If you don't want to do the job, there's the door. If you can't sit here and focus on the one thing that we have asked you to do, which is education, there's the door. You can leave. You can be done. There are plenty of people, even in this crowd right now, that are willing to do your job. You're not paid for it. You're not even really required to be here. So if you don't want to do it, find somebody else who will. We've had enough. You want to send emails about, oh, well, I just don't have time and my life is too hectic. If your life is too hectic, then don't do the job. It's not that difficult. Focus on the education. That is what school is for. After-school clubs are for after school, not during class time. That's it.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak this evening?
Sorry, tucked away in the corner. Geraldine Jones. I have 1 child in the district already, and I'm not sure if the second one will be in here or not. Couple things I would like to address. One of them is a request. Given that the board meeting starts at 5 o'clock, I would really like for it to be pushed to maybe like 5:30 or 6 o'clock so more parents can get here. It is a very much an inconvenience for it to be at 5 o'clock. Because parents are getting off work at 5 o'clock. So I would ask for that to be pushed to at least 5:30 or 6 o'clock. My next thing, after reviewing the agenda, I saw that there was now a conflict of interest form that is now needed. To be filled out. Will these be made viewable to the public? I would like to know, given our administration having to fill out these conflict of interest forms, if we are going to be made aware of these conflict of interests. I say this because we had board members that signed petitions for other candidates' board members, and we didn't know about that until afterwards. So I would like to know if our current board members will support a candidate that I disagree with. Next, why are we still counting cases? Are they dying? Or are we just going to, are we going to make ruling on cases? Because did we count cases for the flu? Did we count cases for, I don't know, I mean, we can go back to what, earaches? Earaches are now a symptom for COVID. So are we going to talk about something like that? Let's see, what else I had here. Oh, here, I'll quote one of your favorite people. The CDC and the NIH, I'm just going to actually end it with just these two actual quotes taken from their website. Informed consent is super important, okay? Informed consent is mandatory for all trials. This is currently a vaccine trial. Teachers need to make these own decisions for themselves. Students need to make these own decisions with their parents, okay? It is obligatory for the provider to make it clear that the patient is participating in a decision-making process and to avoid making a patient feel forced, pressured, or coerced into agreeing with the provider. Threatening someone's job over a vaccine is coercion. It is not acceptable, especially telling them they have to enter into a trial. It's not acceptable, and I realize that this was taken off the agenda last minute. I understand that, but who's to say it's not going to be discussed later at the work session or whatever that's on the schedule? Anyway, so there's that. The school administration is not authorized to provide medical treatment or medical
That's 3 minutes.
devices. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak this evening?
Hi, I'm Dana Tyken. You guys have all received an email from me back in November, and I got a couple of responses from that. I've had 3 children in this school district. We've been in the district for 12 years. And I cannot tell you how disheartening it was sitting at the last board meeting, hearing the president, hearing you guys talk about not responding to emails. That is absolutely unacceptable. From a parent, you guys, some of you are parents. We are passionate about our child's education, about their health, things like that. It is our job to come to you with our concerns. My concern was, somebody said to me, you need to take it to the lowest level. I did. My concern was that the administrators and teachers both violated school board policy. Probably, I think if I remember correctly, 5 or 6 school board policies and Iowa law. And I got no response. It has nothing to do with the week that I had an issue. It had nothing to do with those children. Those kids that ran those events, they were guided by district employees. The district employees need to be disciplined for breaking the policy. The reason I say that, we had the principal and Officer Dobbs sit in front of a TV screen and lecture the kids about policy and
Ma'am, we do not identify individuals by name.
the school resource officer threatened the children via television and reminded them about school board policies and Iowa law. What did we do? Nothing. We came in and talked about how every child in the school district is important. They are. Mine sure doesn't feel important. He doesn't. In May, he came home and said, my life doesn't matter here. He's not involved in any sports through the school. He is not in any clubs. And because he is excluded from those special groups, he doesn't matter here. Let's start looking at everything as a whole, okay? Something I taught my children when they were young: you do not have to like everybody, and not everybody has to like you. But you can be nice and you can be respectful. And that goes for everybody on this board. You treat us parents like we are children and like we are the students in this district. We are not. We are not the children. We are coming to you with our concerns. We elected you to bring those to our concerns. It's not, well, if so-and-so doesn't agree, tough, you need to go ahead and agree with us anyway because the majority agrees. No, it is us parents that are coming to you, even if it's individuals, and saying, we don't like this. Do something about it.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak this evening? Not seeing anyone, I will close the audience.
Okay, my name's Amy Hutchison, and I am a teacher at Indian Creek Elementary School. And first of all, I know you can't answer this, but I'm not sure why 704 was taken out. So I guess I would like to know that, because that's kind of why I'm here. I teach young children, and I love children. So I just want all of you to know that. You're children, and you make you up. Okay, I've been here for over 27 years, and I stay in this district because I love this district. And the authoritative commands that are coming out into our world are very scary. Orders being, people telling me what to do, how to think, what to put into my body, what to say, are really dividing our country and our world. My commander is God. He guides me daily. I put my hope in him alone and not in man. I can't. I'm confused by what this world is doing. God does give me wisdom and joy and gentleness and endurance. He gives me confidence and encouragement. He gives me generosity and so many blessings, strength and love, protection and courage, forgiveness, comfort and discipline, guidance, peace, healing, and most of all, faith. Man cannot give me this. So when it comes to telling us how we need to treat our body, what we need to do to our body, if we should wear masks or not, I really, truly believe God is telling me that it is our decision. And we have to have faith because he is king. Nobody else is. I also believe that all should be tested. If we are to be testing those who are unvaccinated, I really believe at this point in time, all should be tested, because I do know, being in the school and not missing one day of school this year or last year, thank you, Lord, that we all should be tested because we're all getting sick. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to make a comment this evening? Seeing no one, I'm closing the audience communication segment of the agenda. Thank you all for sharing your comments this evening. So this evening we have Cheryl Bass. She is our college career transition counselor, and I'll let Shannon do a better introduction than that.
Glad to have Cheryl here tonight. I did not see you over there behind all the material, so it's really good to see you there, Cheryl. So she's here tonight to talk about her new role. She's not new to Linn-Mar. Cheryl's been here, I can't remember how many years, but she's been here.
This is my 7th year at Linn-Mar.
As a counselor at the high school, and now she's in a shared role position between Kirkwood and Linn-Mar. So she's here to talk about her new role, how that's gone, and just keep in mind as you listen, this is a brand new position. So she is kind of charting uncharted territories for us, and we're glad to have her here tonight to give you an overview on how the first half of the school year has gone in her new position. And without any further ado, Mike is yours, Cheryl.
Thank you, Shannon. As Shannon said, I'm Cheryl Bass. I'm our college career transition counselor at the high school. I was a school counselor for 6 years prior to this as one of the 9-10 counselors. And in our role as school counselors before this year, we split up by domain areas. And so one of the areas that I worked on with an 11-12 counselor was college and career readiness. So this was a great transition for me. I really love doing this work, and so I'm glad I get to serve students in this way. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about the role of college career transition counselor. I might say CCTC throughout my presentation. because that's kind of our acronym for the role. This position came out of a grant opportunity that the state offered. Unfortunately, Linn-Mar did not get the grant, but we decided to move forward with adding the position. And when that was posted, I was happy to apply. I was really excited about the position and really encouraged us to look into this opportunity. So luckily I did get the position from Kirkwood. It was a separate application through Kirkwood and was hired and started in August. So since then, I have met with our school counseling team, our administrative team, and just really talked about how we could support our students at the high school better with college and career readiness activities. If you want to read a little bit more about the history of the position and other positions around the state, there's a great article from the Department of Ed linked there, and I am featured in that article. So my time here at Linn-Mar, I'm here all week except for Wednesday afternoons. On Wednesday afternoons, I meet with our other CCTCs at Kirkwood, and we just talk about planning and talk about how we can create a comprehensive program across all of the schools that are part of the Kirkwood CCTC network. So Cedar Rapids has a couple of positions, College Community and Solon also have positions, and Iowa City will be adding a position this year. So we work together and are trying to do similar things so that we make sure that students across all of our districts are getting the same services. I'll also be working over the summer and over high school breaks when Kirkwood is still in session. So I'm currently under admissions, and they're still trying to find the best place for us, but that's kind of how things are going right now. I just included some of the activities that I've done so far this year and what I'm planning for the future with the How College Works class, which is a dual credit course with Kirkwood. I'm really excited about teaching that class. I think it'll make a huge difference in preparing students for what life after high school will look like. And I want to make that inclusive to not just include college students, but anyone who's looking at post-secondary training. Some of the things that I want to highlight are our individual career and college counseling. I do have a targeted group of students that I'll talk about in a second, why I've chosen those groups and who those students are. But I'm reaching out to individual students in the populations that are listed and talking about what their plans are for after high school. So it doesn't matter if they're looking at Kirkwood or if they're looking at college at all. I just want them to have a plan when they leave and have taken steps to get into whatever that plan is. We've done a few college campus visits this year, and we're working on doing additional visits this spring. So those have included our Regent universities, Iowa, Iowa State, UNI. We did a Mount Mercy visit specific to nursing and did 2 visits to Kirkwood. So I mentioned our student data, so I do have targeted populations, and these were decided amongst our Kirkwood group. Looking at the data from the state, these groups are underserved across most schools in Iowa, including here at Linn-Mar. And so I have about 110 seniors that are on my list at the high school to serve, and then 129 juniors. And you can see the breakdown of those groups of who is in those groups. Keep in mind that some students are across all groups. So I do have some students who might fall into and have an IEP. They are on free and reduced lunch, and they identify as a minority student, race student. I'm also serving Compass. I come over about once a week, sometimes every other week, and just take whoever wants to talk to me at that point. So I'm not serving all 99 students at Compass, but it's, you know, whoever wants to come that day and work with me is who I'm working with. And they've been a lot of fun to work with, so. I just posted where I grab my data. This is all public data that anyone can see at any time. So the post-secondary readiness indicators are from our Iowa school performance profiles. The post-secondary intention enrollment data comes from post-secondary readiness reports, and the FAFSA data comes from our FAFSA Iowa website. So I just wanted to point out a few trends that we see here at Linn-Mar and how I'm hoping to improve the trends that we've seen in the past. This trend line, the first line shows our post-secondary intent. So students do a survey at the end of their senior year every year. So anyone who's graduating has to complete the post-secondary enrollment survey. And so our latest data is from 2020. And they let us know what their plans are for after high school. So post-secondary intent right now includes 2-year, 4-year, and diploma and certificate programs for both private and public institutions. In the future, they're hoping to add on Iowa National Guard, enlistment information and apprenticeship information, but right now it's just post-secondary enrollment into a college or university or accredited program. And then below that, you'll see the actual enrollment rate is with the blue squares. And so what I'm really looking at is the gap between those students who say that they're going on to post-secondary education and who actually show up in the fall. So you'll notice there's about an 11% difference over the last 6 years of our data. So I really want to close that gap and help that, what we call summer melt, when they leave us and they haven't fully formed their plan for next year or taken the steps to get into college that next fall. So this is just a breakdown of our demographic information. This is our free and reduced lunch students who enroll, and it is a 3-year average. So you'll notice that there's quite a gap there, over 30% gap between our students who are on free and reduced lunch and not on free and reduced lunch who end up enrolling in the fall after senior year. This is our students on an IEP, about a 40% gap, a little over 40% gap. And then our demographic data. And you'll see there pretty typical data where we have our Asian population is enrolling at the highest rate, and then our white students, and then Black, Hispanic, and then the multiracial Native American and Pacific Islander data is redacted because of low counts. And then ELL. So we discussed adding ELL data, and some of the other schools are working with our ELL students a little more intensely. Here at Linn-Mar, we've had some really good rates with our ELL students. They do have a college and career readiness class, and typically they fall into one of those other demographic areas. So I'm hoping to catch them that way, but still work with our ELL teachers at the high school to support those students as well. So with all of that information in mind, I did set a goal for myself this year, and so I'm working to increase the post-secondary enrollment of our free and reduced lunch students from 51.6% to 65%. When we look at our students' intention data, it is much higher than that 51%. So a lot of them are planning on going on to post-secondary education, but something's happening between when they take that survey and the fall. So since I will have that opportunity to work over the summer, I can do more outreach with them and make sure that they're completing the next steps. I've already started reaching out to our admissions counselors at the Regents. Kirkwood and the Regents are our #1 matriculation schools, so working with those admissions counselors to make sure students are completing the next steps is really important to help those students. And so they're already letting me know students who haven't applied for scholarships or who still needs to file their FAFSA. So that relationship has been a really positive and a good way for me to be able to communicate with students about next steps as well. So the next area that I'll talk about is our FAFSA rates. So FAFSA is one of the contributing factors to students attending college in the fall. So it's an area where we can easily get data. So I just wanted to show our trends over the last few years. I think it's important that everyone files the FAFSA, even if they feel like they're not going to get financial aid. I hear that from families. But it's important to file the FAFSA because you just never know what's going to happen, right? And these last 2 years really show us that we just never know what's going to happen. And if, God forbid, something were to happen to a family member and you needed aid at that point, to file the FAFSA during that time would be really stressful. So I do encourage families to always file the FAFSA, but especially our underserved populations with our free and reduced lunch students and our underrepresented minorities. And our underrepresented minorities are those Black and Hispanic students that I mentioned before. So you'll see here from this data that our rates between our non-free and reduced lunch and our non-underrepresented minority populations is much lower than our overall rates. So I do have positive news about this area because I do get weekly data and can report on how we're doing right now. So as of December 27th, 42% of our high school seniors have completed the FAFSA, And we've done that. I've offered 3 different FAFSA presentations in partnership with ICANN, and also just had students coming in to work through ICANN, or through FAFSA applications together. As of last week, we were actually at 42% completion, and that's a 6% increase from this time last year. We're currently ranked 90th amongst all Iowa schools, which is pretty awesome. And out of our CCTC group, we're number 2. Solon's ahead of us. And then our free and reduced price lunch students, we still have quite a gap going on, and these students really need much more targeted individual support in completing the FAFSA and understanding how to file and all the things that go into it. They really think some families think it's a really complicated process and aren't really sure where to start. So I'm working with those students to help support their families to complete the FAFSA. So last week, we did have a slight increase. We're at 22% of our free and reduced lunch completion for, and non-free and reduced lunch is up to 51%. And then our last area is our underrepresented minorities. This graph, I feel good about this graph. I think it looks great compared to previous years. And so we now have 40% of our underrepresented minorities have completed the FAFSA. So that's all good news. So you'll see here my goal for FAFSA is to increase specifically our free and reduced lunch population, students completing the FAFSA from 41% to 51%, because those are the students who are enrolling. So in the past, we found that 51% of students are enrolling who are on free and reduced lunch. So I want to at least get there. If I can also meet that goal of 65% enrolling, hopefully 65% of them will have completed the FAFSA, but lofty goals. So I just wanted to share some other data about things that I'm working on, and just things to be thinking about in the future. One of them, or they're all related to post-secondary readiness from the school performance profile. ACT and SAT testing are also an indicator of college readiness, and those students who will enroll in the fall or who take the ACT are more likely to enroll. So you'll see here our rates in the past of students who have completed the ACT or SAT. The majority of our students here at Linn-Mar do take the ACT, very few take the SAT. And every school will take either one. So we want students taking the ACT. They can take it for free if they're on free and reduced lunch. So getting the word out to students that it's a free test for them is really important. And we've started adding a 10th grade pre-ACT test so they can take a fairly inexpensive test, practice test, so that they're prepared for the full test when they're juniors. And our students do well. When they take the ACT, they do well. So 21 is college ready, and you'll see our averages there for the composite is 23.5. Another factor is taking college level coursework, so or post-secondary advanced coursework. So thinking about our dual credit courses, I've worked with a lot of students over the last month, getting enrolled with their Kirkwood classes, making sure that they've taken their online orientation if they're taking a class for the first time. So last year we had 469 students who took a dual credit course. That's a lot of students, and I'm hoping we can see that number continue to grow. Looking at our own data, I've dived deeper into our data, and when students from the demographic groups that I've identified take dual credit courses, they're more likely to go on to college as well. So we want to continue that trend. And then last, having students take career and technical education is really important. The CCTC position really does try to support CTE because we know students can get into training programs that have no cost, no tuition cost through the last dollar scholarship. And a lot of those programs are based on our CTE programs that we have here in the high school. So we want students to be looking at alternative training options or short-term training options that are low cost so that they can go get a good job and start working sooner. And it aligns with the governor's Future Ready Iowa goal of 70% of Iowans receiving some sort of training after high school. So, just a couple of highlights for this year. I do have some updates on some of our data. I didn't put our University of Iowa data here, but we have 54 applicants to Kirkwood. We actually have 44 UNI applicants, 74 Iowa State applicants, and my number today from Iowa, I was blown away by because it was way more than I thought it would be. It's 137. So typically we have about between 80 and 100 students who end up at Kirkwood every year, and then it goes down from there. So Iowa and Iowa State trade back and forth year to year, and then UNI is usually our fourth school. So things are looking good. A lot of students have finished their applications. We have a couple of students who did get in early action, so they have already committed to where they're going, which is exciting for them. A lot more students are taking the ACT. Our December test date was very full. We had 137 students test in December at Linn-Mar. We have students at Compass who are taking college credit instead of graduating early. So about 11 students have decided instead of graduating early, they're going to try a Kirkwood class or two. So I'll be excited to see what happens. And then I've also been promoting the pre-apprenticeship program that the University of Iowa Labor Center offers, which is a free program to help students get their OSHA training, CPR certification, and then just some introductory information about the trades. And they do follow up to help make sure they get placed into a career as well. So we have eight students for sure signed up, and a few more that I'm trying to convince to do that program still this spring, and that will start February 5th. So I'm excited to see that opportunity continue to grow for our students as well. And then last but not least, I encourage you to follow us on social media. I try to post frequently, but sometimes life gets in the way, and I'm not very good at posting, but we've had a lot going on with job shadows and the Linn-Mar Foundation scholarships coming up, so if you follow us, you'll find out more about what I've got going on. Any questions? Yes.
You mentioned the cost of the pre-ACT. My understanding is that, at least for the ACT and SAT, there is a discount or perhaps even a way for it to be fully covered. Is that available for the pre-ACT as well?
Yeah, when students have signed up in the past for pre-ACT, we ask if they need help paying for it, and so that we take care of the cost if they need that.
Okay, great.
And it's like $15 for the pre-ACT, and they can get the ACT or SAT paid for, waived, if they're on free or reduced lunch.
Okay.
They just have to talk to their counselor.
Okay, great. Well, are counselors, are we reaching out, you know what I mean? To them to make sure that they know that?
So that's one of the things that I let the students know who I knew were on free and reduced lunch this year. I've reached out to them with an email to say, you qualify for this, and then counselors also let students know in their individual meetings that they could get the waiver.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
And then I wondered what your thoughts are on the barriers for dual enrollment. You know, those numbers vary significantly. And so, I mean, I can think of a couple, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, and what are some things that we can do there?
So, one of the number one things is I think we have students who would benefit from doing an academy at Kirkwood, because they can get some certifications while they're in high school by doing a technical program through Kirkwood. They offer advanced manufacturing with welding and robotics, and there are some certifications that come along with that. That's in Hiawatha on Boyson Road at the Linn Regional Center, and we don't provide transportation. So that would be a barrier that students face if they don't have transportation.
Pardon me, do we provide transportation to the main campus?
No, we don't provide transportation at all.
Okay.
And that's the other thing with main campus. If a student's taking a dual credit course, the majority of students take them online.
Okay.
So almost all of them take them online. But the technical programs that are year-long academies are very hands-on, and they need to be in person.
Right, okay.
So in order to take advantage of that, they have to be able to drive. Sorry, my mask is funky. So that would be a barrier, is that transportation piece. And that's also a concern I have for things like job shadows and internships, that they have to be able to get themselves there, which is why we offer the campus visits, because we know students aren't always able to get to campus on their own.
Which is a benefit of something like Venture, which is now, you know what I mean, we're doing that project-based learning in-house, and so transportation is no longer a barrier there.
Right.
Okay. All right, well, that's what I got for you.
Thank you
you very much.
I do want to mention that I'm not taking away from anything that the school counselors do. So they still do all of their regular senior meetings with all of these students. I'm just that extra layer of support where I'm doing more like assisting one-on-one to maybe complete their application completely. I had a kid come in today and we did his Kirkwood application together and we talked about what next steps he needed to do to make sure he was ready to go to Kirkwood in the fall.
I have a couple questions as well. So you mentioned that there's a pretty big gap between students that express intent for post-secondary and then the percentage of students that actually end up attending. Do you have any thoughts as to what the biggest barriers are that between those two and why there is that gap? And what we might be able to do, if anything, to address it?
Yeah, so one of the things that I found out going to Kirkwood is that a lot of the students who don't enroll didn't complete orientation. So they can sign up for orientation as early as March for a May orientation. But if they never sign up, they just kind of keep kicking the can down the road, and then it's August and they haven't completed orientation, which they have to do before they can enroll in coursework. So I don't know what got lost in translation there, why they maybe didn't make it to orientation. But then they were scrambling. I started texting students in August saying, hey, I see that you haven't done orientation and you haven't enrolled yet. Are you still planning to go to Kirkwood? And some of them were like, oh yeah, I really was gonna do that and I meant to do it, and they just kept putting it off. They didn't have people reminding them all the time. So I'm hoping that I can kind of be that nagging mom in the background saying, you haven't completed this yet, get that done. So that's a big barrier. The other thing is I think students think that they can't afford it because they haven't completed their Fafsa. So if we have that many students not completing the Fafsa, especially on free and reduced lunch, they're missing out on the Pell Grant, most likely, which is $6,000. That covers a year of tuition at Kirkwood, right? So, and if they're living at home, they're probably getting a check back even. It's probably not a lot, but they're getting a check back from Kirkwood. So we wanted to make sure that they're getting all of the aid that's available to them so that they're ready to go when fall hits.
And then the other thing that I noticed in the data was a gap between Linn-Mar's participation in CTE, particularly around the trades in comparison to the state averages. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that and what, if anything, I think it was that slide.
So I'm on the CTE advisory committee and we talk every year about different requirements that are getting in the way of students taking CTE. I would really love to see more CTE options through Venture because I think that's a great way to learn CTE is because most of those students are taking the CTE coursework because they like hands-on, right? And so if they're able to do project-based learning with a hands-on experience, what a better way to attract those students. I would also like to see more students taking advantage of things like our community build project because I think a lot of students maybe just don't realize that that's what they are signing up for their senior year and aren't signing up for it because they don't realize that that's what it is. You know, that they're gonna actually go do a hands-on build a house. So getting more promotion for some of those things. The other thing that we talk about in our CTE advisory meetings is how we're competing with AP and band and music, and that between that and core courses, sometimes it's just hard to get in CTE coursework, and how can we make CTE more appealing than, I don't want them to not be in band or music, right? I want them to do, or band or choir, I want them to do those things, but I also want them to learn about a lot of different career opportunities that are out there. So thinking about ways to make that appealing to students is important, and getting started early in middle school would be a good step.
Okay. Cheryl, one more question just to bounce off what Melissa talked about when we're talking about that gap between those who, you know, state an intention and then don't end up enrolling. And you mentioned that it's a lot of times for reasons of orientation or FAFSA. Are we providing, you know, they meet with their school counselors on a very limited basis because counselors have 400 plus students that they're trying to service. Are we giving enough time for them within the school day to complete things like that? Because I think a lot of times a barrier is, you know, they're kids, and so we give them these assignments to go home and do, and whether they're gonna do them or not, you know what I mean, is anyone's guess, especially when it's not like a required thing, when they don't have somebody who can kind of walk them through very step by step. And so I wonder if, you know, what that looks like. How much time are we able to give them within the school day in order to complete that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so counselors do career lessons with students. So this year, unfortunately, they did one before Christmas break, and then they'll do one at the start of this term to get ready for registration. But it's hard sometimes to find like a common class where they can come in and take time away. But there's no common time in the day besides RTI to grab everybody. So everybody would have to be in the same, like in the auditorium to do like an activity like that together. So I've been kind of thinking about how I can grab students next year to like create their FSA ID. Every student can do that on their own as long as they know their social security number. So if I can let them know ahead of time, hey, you're gonna need your social security number to create your FSA ID tomorrow, then they can come prepared for that. So that's one of the things that I'm trying to figure out, how can we get in to do some of that. I offered some application workshops through RTI and no one came. They actually are more likely to come if they send them a pass and invite them to come see me than for me to say, hey, there's this session that anyone can drop in on, then no one comes. So I don't know what the carrot is to get them to come. But like I said, they come if I invite them individually. So I'm still trying to figure out that thing that gets them coming through the door. And I'm hoping that when more students know about me and can talk to each other about what I do, they'll see the benefit of coming to my room. I have the College Career Center, so it's not really an office, it's a big, beautiful room, so.
I would be, how long does orientation take over at Kirkwood?
Well, they did it online before, but they're going back to in-person.
Right.
And so it'll be during the day, so it's a couple hours that they have to go to campus for.
I am just curious about what the possibilities look like for, you know, basically transporting kids over to, so that is done by the time the school year is over, so that, you know, summer doesn't, you know what I mean, become, you know, this, it sort of gets away from them, and they kind of have all their ducks in a row by the time that they, you know, they graduate, so that it's kind of like hands off and they can, you know, kind of get books.
So one of the things that I'm hoping to do is because I work for Kirkwood too, following up with kids when I know they haven't registered for orientation yet, to say, before we even get out of school, because then if I see them face to face, I know that they will go, I can make them go and do it right then. But when they leave for summer, it's gonna be a lot harder to get a hold of them and get them to come in and see me. So that's my goal, is before the end of the year, you're signed up and you go. Unfortunately, most of the orientations happen after their last day. So we've talked about in our group at Kirkwood, how can we like set a day where I can bring a bunch of Kirkwood kids out to do orientation. One of the things we want though is for them to see other students and not just Linn-Mar students. I don't want them to think that they're gonna go to Kirkwood and just see a bunch of Linn-Mar students. There are a lot of Linn-Mar students at Kirkwood, and I see a lot on campus every time I'm there, but I want them to see that they're gonna meet other people too, so we don't wanna make it just an exclusive Linn-Mar day. That's a concern that we would have for doing that.
Now, it's also true that juniors and seniors at Linn-Mar can take courses at Kirkwood, correct?
Yes.
It's mostly online.
Yep.
And what is the max credit that when they cross the stage that they can actually have college credit?
Yeah, so senior year plus actually changed that there's not a cap per year, but per term, Kirkwood has a cap of 18 credits per term for a student because you're going beyond the full-time student credit count. So I just actually looked today. We have 194 concurrent classes this semester. Students signed up just for online or in-person classes at Kirkwood's main campus, 194 courses. Not 194 students, 194 courses that they've signed up for.
Is there going to be an impact on what is coming out, I think, last evening in regards to some colleges and universities, you don't need an ACT or an SAT to get into their college or university?
Yes, we've been seeing it already because most of them are test optional now. So they have some different requirements for scholarships, and it's usually more beneficial for a student to take the ACT or SAT because they likely qualify for a higher scholarship if they have taken it. So we're still encouraging them to test. because they might qualify for more scholarships. There are also other scholarships that require an ACT score or SAT score, so we still want them testing even if an admissions counselor doesn't need it, just because we don't want them to miss out on an opportunity.
Well, when that comes out, I'm just very pleased that we're accentuating the ACT and SAT testing.
Yeah, and it's not right for everyone.
Because it's a matter of, finance for them and their parents to be able to do that. And
yeah, we'll see how scholarships follow. I think they've been a little slower to follow that trend than admissions has been, so we'll see what happens over the next few years.
Matt or Sandra?
All I want to say is thank you for all you do, because I know there are a lot of students out there that need the extra push, and you are a great person to do that. You're always friendly to them. I've seen you interact with them, and it's always positive. So good job, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a part of us as well as Kirkwood.
I will piggyback on what you said there. What you're doing is something that certainly would have benefited me when I was in high school. So I appreciate what you're doing, and keep doing it.
Thanks.
Well,
I appreciate your support.
I have a couple questions. I can't let you go without questions. I'm glad you mentioned the scholarship part of the ACT, because I think that's a really important piece that parents who are trying to help their student and they hear, oh, test optional, one less thing, but they don't realize that the ramifications of losing scholarships. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Can you talk about how you're communicating these new resources in your network with parents? Because we know that parents are still the #1 influencer. No matter how many conversations we have and how great you're going to do already with the interventions, parents are still the #1 influencer. So can you talk about how you're connecting with them?
Yeah, so I started out the year and sent a letter to all of the students that I had identified from my senior list to let them know that I was available and what services I would be providing to students. And then from there, it's been really just more individual outreach. So I kind of start with an email because it's easier to send an email, and I know parents are inundated with emails. So as I'm talking to students, they talk to their parents, or I will call their parents or let them know. Like, I've had a few that have just been like really personal conversations to say, this is what your student and I have talked about. These are the next steps that we need to take, but we need your help with them. So having those kinds of conversations, and then the follow-up after that, if I don't hear back from an email, is a phone call to say, hey, we've got to still take care of this or that. So I'm kind of letting seniors do their thing during first semester, and now it's more like, I got to get in, and now I'm calling your parent. We're going to move beyond you because this isn't working anymore. I also send out a weekly email to our seniors and their parents, just with like an update of things that all seniors should be doing. I don't want to make it just like this exclusive club. I want everyone to know what they should be doing. And if I'm going to write an email for one group, I might as well send it to all of them so they get that email. And then my social media experience has increased, and I'm learning how to market things a little bit better to get kids to like it and get announcements on LMTV and stuff like that. So
I follow your page, and I think you're doing a good job. So from one marketer
That
to
means
another.
lots to me, for sure.
I was going to ask about including all of the students in certain communications, but you already asked that. Can you, and maybe this is, I can talk to JT later too, but you mentioned a lot of this is based on free and reduced lunch, but with everyone getting free and reduced lunch right now, how is that being tracked so that we can make sure that we're still getting to the right students?
So that's one of the things that I've talked to the counselors about. There have been some kids who were like at the beginning of the year, they popped up on my free and reduced lunch list, and then they went away. So I kept those kids on my list when they went away, and then students who are still trickling in with applications, I think. So a couple of counselors have said, this student's on free and reduced lunch, and I'm like, well, out of all of the polls that I've done, they weren't on my list yet, but then we just keep adding kids, and they just keep sending them to me. One of the other things that we've talked about is how do we meet with our first generation college students, because we don't collect that information anywhere. So how do we get that information and make sure that those students are getting support? Because although they probably land in one of these 3 groups, some of them might not. And so we might be missing some students who would be maybe free and reduced lunch, or who just got free and reduced lunch because their parents are doing better, but they would be first gen college students, and we want to support those students as well. So those are just referrals from counselors, or they might even say, I have this kid who it's a really great kid. They just have dealt with a lot of things and they just need a little more support. So I'm not gonna turn anybody away. And I have kids who just stop in. And I don't say, oh, sorry, I can't work with you because you're not on my list of 110 students. I just help them. So,
Well, I'm really excited about this role, and I'm really excited to see what the next 6 months
Yeah.
bring. And I'm really excited about the FAFSA stuff, you know. Now I don't have to email you, so that's great. So thank you for sharing.
yeah, thank you.
Any other
Thanks,
last
everybody.
questions for Cheryl?
I'm just gonna try to make it short and sweet, but it didn't work, so.
It never does.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Awesome,
Thank you.
All right. Next, we have Nathan, going to share
Just hang on just a
some of
minute.
our academic information.
Yes, so, thank you. Nathan Weir, Associate Superintendent, and I'm just going to make some quick connections from what Cheryl talked about with some of our fall data, some of our SIAC data, so that you can see what that looks like. But before we let Cheryl leave, Cheryl was announced as the Secondary Counselor of the Year through the Iowa State Counselors. Thank you, Iowa School Counselor Association. So we were in the presence of greatness, and she really is completely deserving of that award for the work that she does and has done. So on behalf of the Linn-Mar Community School District, we'd like to congratulate you. I know, you're going to be mad at me for doing that. so-
Congratulations again, Cheryl.
Well, I thought Rick was gonna do it too.
It's actually, I wrote down Cheryl Award and then totally went through the rest of my notes. So I'm so glad Nathan brought that up.
Hey, that's all right. We're excited about that. Okay, I just want to tie up a couple loose ends for you, especially in regards to Cheryl's work. So you saw some, and you have in your data folder, a variety of different assessments that we've looked at. You've seen all the Iowa assessment data. I included for you 3 different looks in there, and those are on the multicolored sheets. It's the same Iowa assessment data. I just like it because it puts K-12 3rd through 11th grade all in one sheet. But basically what you can see on there is that we have gaps with our free and reduced lunch students, our race and ethnicity students, and our students with IEPs. So Cheryl is one of the things that we're trying to do in that shared position to really help kind of highlight.
I don't think we have whatever you're referencing.
Okay, well, let me pull that up.
I mean, I went through the exhibits online, but we don't have a copy of whatever you're. So.
It's all right, I'll pull it up so you know what it's lengthy and I'm not gonna go through it all, but it is in the agenda for tonight. So for our audience too, it's under, where is
Go all
it?
the way to the top and hit agendas and exhibits.
There we go.
There you go.
So it would be this, the Iowa School Performance Profile.
Thank you.
So what I'm referring to as this color-coded document would be this, and this is the same information that we've already had. So you've already gone through this. These were the level of percentage of kids proficient on the Iowa assessments that we did last spring. So you can see it just breaks it down by grade level, school, ethnicity, gender, LEP would be limited English proficiency, so those are ELL students. But really what I wanted you to see was just, and Cheryl talked about this, so along the bottom you can see the disparities in the test scores from low income, race, and special ed. So the green and yellow tabs or colored bars on those bar graphs would be proficient. The green is advanced, so the red is not proficient. And it's consistent. English language arts, math is actually a little bit higher in the terms of students that aren't proficient, but that was a trend that we saw all across the district last year during COVID, and as well for science, which we test in 5th, 8th, and 11th grade. So you have all of that information. What I wanted to share with you then is to just talk about the Iowa School Performance Profile. This used to be called the Iowa School Report Card. I'm sorry, I got to make it small enough so everybody can see it. So in Cheryl's presentation, she showed you lots of those bar graphs that were colored and then had a dot for the state average. So that comes specifically from the new Iowa School Performance Profile. So every year in roughly December, the state developed a website, and the Gazette typically picks this up and prints this as information for us. But it's based on the Every Student Succeeds Act. It's our way of or our state's way of categorizing schools based on their performance. What you can see then on this document would be our schools. This column, as we scroll down, would be the 2019 rating for the school. The ratings are on a scale from exceptional at the top, high performing, commendable, acceptable, needs improvement, and priority. So you can see there's no 2020 scores because they suspended this identification system during the COVID year. But you can see here, I'll look at the schools as far as the difference between their 2019 and their 2021 rating. What those scores, so then you see on there an actual scale score. That is where those specific indicators that Cheryl mentioned are coming from into our score. So I just wanted you to be aware of what's in the score, how that's tied to our student achievement, but then also how we're taking steps, like with Cheryl's position, to make sure that we're closing some of those gaps. So within each of these measures every year, there are things that the state requires us to report out on that are beyond our test scores. So they have the participation rate. We have to have 95% or more of our students participate in assessments. Thankfully, even during the COVID year, we met that, which was really a kudos to our special ed and teaching and learning department in all our buildings because they did everything they could to bring as many kids on site for testing. If you remember, the state would not allow, well, I take that back. They would allow us to test remotely, meaning you could test at home, but if you did that, you were automatically not proficient. So we chose as a district not to make that an option. I know, it makes no sense. They gave us the tool to do it. They could have taken it at home, but even if they would have taken it at home and gotten all the questions right, those students would have been considered non-proficient. So we tried to get as many kids in as we could, and we did. We met our participation rate. So student participation is part of that score. The other score, which we've already talked about, is the academic achievement. So that's the proficiency, the number of kids who are proficient in math and English language arts, and then the scale score for both of those. Then they also have a growth rate. So this is by looking at the assessment scores over time. So if a student isn't quite proficient but showed growth from one testing period to the other, then that measure is included. It includes our high school graduation rate, our progress in achieving English language proficiency, and then the last piece, which I've included in the board exhibits, which is what makes this document lengthy, is the conditions for learning survey. So you might have heard your kids, this happened to be the grades 3 through 5. We take a survey when we do our Iowa assessments as well in grades 3 through 11. The state requires us to do that survey, and it breaks the survey findings down into 5 areas. So you have adult-student relationships, boundaries and expectations, emotional safety, physical safety, and student-to-student relationships. So in your board packet, you have all the results of those for grades 3 through 5, and then there's also a summary document for 6th grade through 12th grade. Now, there's additional measures that go into our school performance profile, but they aren't included in this score. But if you look this up on the state website, and I'll scroll down so you can kind of see the other buildings in the district. There are other measures that they also track. They track our attendance, our chronic absenteeism, which would be defined as missing 10% or more of your school days, the percent of students assessed, staff retention, suspension and expulsion, and progress on our state goals. So we set goals every year. So those measures aren't influenced in the score per se, but they are collected. There's a state average generated, and those are all indicators that pull together for the Iowa school performance profile. Essentially, what I wanted you to see tonight is that our scores look fairly good, and this would be consistent with what I shared with you. We didn't see quite as big a dip as we thought with COVID, but you can see the scores there. We did have some schools change categories. The last thing that I'll add then is there is a school improvement process tied to these, and right now we have Echo Hill, Excelsior, Lynn Grove, the high school, and Wilkins as targeted schools. those would be targeted for the subgroups that I would have showed you on this slide. So for schools that have a big disparity, which we have 5 schools between either their low income, their race, or special ed. I think most of our schools are special ed, which is a pattern that's consistent across the state. This isn't just a Linn-Mar thing. But those schools would be identified as targeted schools where their principal and leadership team go through a process to look at the data that I've included for you here, make changes to their programs in order to impact those. And then we work with them at central office on those plans.
Can you give me an example of what one of those plans might look like without getting into details you can't share?
No, I can give you, it's just pretty technical. There's a crosswalk tool that the state has created. So the first thing the teams do is the principal selects a certain amount of people to be on that leadership team. This does fit closely with the high reliability schools. So I know we brought our new board members up to speed on the high reliability schools process. But the tool is basically a school improvement tool. So it'll say, go through and look at these test scores. Do you have instructional minutes that match that? What do your instructional strategies look like? And so the leadership team will walk through an improvement plan. They document that. That gets submitted to the state, and our AEA school improvement consultants really help us with that and kind of guide that work. So there's certain things they have to do in the fall. There's certain follow-up things in the winter that they have to report. And then they have to list a spring report at the end of the year, so that's part of that process.
Okay, so I guess what I was kind of curious about is not so much the paperwork side of the plan, but what do we do with the kids under these plans? Like, what is a building doing in terms of working, or, I mean, is it a shift in how classes are taught? Is it targeted groups for students that we know are not proficient? Like, what does that look like in actual student learning?
Good question. All of those things. It would be whatever the school decides is their most important next step to do with that work. So, for example, I know our elementary buildings that are targeted have a difference between special ed and regular ed. Well, that's always been a thing, but we are looking at delivery of minutes, and when kids get their specially designed instruction for IEPs, what are they missing during class time, and are we making sure we're doing it at the right time? So those would all be things. The other thing that we're doing district-wide is the investment in the new reading materials, because that's been a huge disconnect. Our materials that we were previously using would not have supported some of the work that we need the new materials now to do, and they are doing that. So that's why we adopted some K2 materials, and we're looking now at additional reading materials 3rd through 8th grade.
Well, and I would guess the math strategist positions would fit into this?
Was another one. Yep, absolutely.
I will pause my questions and let others speak now.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Can you tell us a little bit about, similar to what Britt was asking, what the interventions look like for some of those other disparities? So I think that it's a little bit easier for me to wrap my head around the special education disparity, because those are kids that have already been identified as having some type of learning disability or something that's a barrier for their learning, and they've got a plan in place. But what was more difficult for me were the racial disparities and the income disparities, because there were such significant gaps in their performance that it was, in some of those subjects, it was as significant of a difference as special education on an IEP or not on an IEP. And that, to me, is difficult to wrap my head around. Like, not only the why, but then what are we doing about that? That our children who are low income, or our children who are minority students in our district have as much of an achievement gap as students on an IEP. So can you talk a little bit about what kinds of interventions either we've had in place or are going to be putting in place to address those kinds of disparities?
Yep. And I should have clarified that a little more. That's what I'm looking up right now. I can only see, have to go back to the previous year, but I can only see like our targeted schools this year, Lynn Grove and Wilkins, they're special ed. I know Excelsior is special ed, and I know Echo is special ed. I'm not 100% sure which one the high school is. So
What do
I
you
don't
mean by
know.
that?
Well, when the state selected these three things, the targeted area that they said you need to improve on is the special ed category. So I'm not aware of any schools that we have that were identified with the racial or the free and reduced, if that makes sense.
So just to help clarify that piece too, that doesn't mean there's not work to be done in those schools at that point.
Right.
But the plan that each school creates to address the identification by the state process has to focus on the special ed portion of it for that compliance requirement piece from the state level.
So do we still develop a plan even though the state doesn't require us to develop a plan to address those other disparities?
Absolutely. So this data was also shared with our new equity committee. Our equity, diversity, and inclusion committee is working on some of those same things, trying to correlate some of that. That work is really in its infancy, so we haven't made any program decisions with that yet. But Shannon's right, as far as what the state's asking you to do, it's geared toward, they only pick one of those with the disparities, and all of our schools, and I'm pretty sure the high school is special ed as well, but I will double check. And so therefore the specific measures we've been asked to take right now are around the IEP, non-IEP students, which would be the special ed, non-special ed. But I get what you're saying, Melissa, like there's other areas we need to influence by this, right? Like nobody in the district is okay that by low income or race that you're twice as likely to be not proficient. Like those are huge areas for us that we're looking at with principals. They're taking into their high reliability schools process and trying to decide how do we take all of this data and put that into action.
Is this an ongoing trend or is this new this year?
Good question. This is the first year for the conditions for learning. We've done it in the past, but it hasn't been reported and tied to this. So this was the first year we've seen the survey results with that, and there would be some of these themes throughout those. We can go back and see past years. Our data has always been sorted by low income, free and reduced lunch, and race. However, the challenge with that is just comparing, because 2019 was our first year of this new test, and so it'd be tough to compare previous iterations of that test, which weren't necessarily aligned with this test. That's why we only have the 2019 and 2021 test data years. And this is only showing 2021.
I know comparing year to year is always very helpful when we're looking at data and determining like where a trend started and what we can maybe do to address it. But when I was reviewing this data, when 60% of a specific race of students is not proficient in science, if the state doesn't call that out, that's fine. They want to put emphasis on it. But what are we doing about that? Because, and I know some of it is the timing of when the test was taken and have they taken the right classes, but then that brings me to, do we have enough staff having the meetings to make sure they're taking the right classes at the right time? It just opens up other questions for me. Not that we're not addressing them, but I'd like to hear more about how we are kind of shifting procedure or really considering what that looks like, because 60% for me, I don't need to name the race. I don't want to call those students out, but that's a concerning statistic for me.
Yep. And it was for SIAC. I think Rachel, Matt, were you on SIAC committee in the fall? Who else sat on that from our board? Barry was, okay. Yeah, and that came up with our SIAC, same thing, like, hey, what are we doing with this? We will certainly, we've put this data in front of those building leadership teams. We want to empower them to make the local decision for their building that's the best, and so we're making sure we're following through on those plans. But there's some systems pieces too, so those are other things that we'll need to look at is what inequities in our system do we need to address as well to help support this.
So, I'm kind of curious, so, if the state selects, that it is our special ed kids and we're focused on that, and we've got this very comprehensive plan to address that, and, similar, like you said, to high reliability schools, which I've got some familiarity with, so that gives me that gives me some good context. Why, or are we, do we have a comprehensive plan? If we, and if we can develop a comprehensive plan for special ed, can't we then do that for some of this? Because it's just not an acceptable level And the longer that it goes on, it sort of feeds on itself. And one of the things that, Britt just mentioned, and I mentioned this to you when I talked to you today, was, the process in 8th grade for choosing classes. I mean, that would be just one area where I'm sure you could, identify some systems that perhaps are allowing kids to slip through the cracks. And so how do we identify those things and then come up with a comprehensive plan to address it? Because, it's not really work that the equity committee is going to do in earnest. I mean, those folks are working on they're not teachers, they're not educators. And then, but, who is working on that?
Well, and you saw a lot of that from Cheryl, and so we need to use her model with the upperclassmen as far as what she's working on to really see how can we keep.
Hold on one second. What I heard from Cheryl, and don't get me wrong, the work that Cheryl's doing is phenomenal, but that does not seem to be really aligned with what we're talking about here at all, to be honest.
Too late.
Yeah.
Right, like she's talking like graduation, post-secondary, but we're talking about literally from 3rd grade on up. And by the time they've gotten to her, that's it. They may not be proficient. Now they're ending up in remedial classes at the post-secondary level, or they, because they haven't had the achievement that perhaps they're capable of, they don't even see post-secondary education as an option.
Yeah.
So what are the things that we can get in place? Because, or are we, that's my question is like, what are the things that we're getting in place? When that, quite honestly, that was like a 5-alarm fire number to me, like a bullhorn in your ear.
Yeah, 2 things to keep in mind, I'll just jump in with quickly is, one, I think this regional profile came out about December 19th or 20th, right before winter break. So it is really information that hasn't been in our staff's hands hardly at all yet. But the second piece is the conversations questions you're having and reactions is the same type of level of conversation questions that happens in buildings in the building leadership team or lead learning team as they reflect on their building data, and where it just leads to a ton of good questions and a ton of good conversation as far as whether it has to be an official improvement plan identified by the state or just part of their natural PLC, high reliability schools process of evaluating where they're at as a building and changes that can be made. That's exactly the type of work we want. Type of conversation we want to have come out of this.
Right.
So
but
there's a definite value to that.
I had this data back in November, and now it's January, so it's a couple of months later, and I'm wondering then, like, what are we talking about then? What does this, I know that we can't throw together an entire plan and fix it all in 2 months. I certainly don't expect that of you guys, but like,
You're asking for progress from where
correct.
you
I
are.
need to see that there's progress, and it doesn't sound to me, quite honestly, that we're really like, it's like, well, we're going to, but.
Oh, and I probably mischaracterized that when I said they focus on special ed. The ESSA process, which the S is Every Student Succeeds Act, the targeted things that schools have to do, is very complex. It's not just in relation to special ed, even though that's our targeted area. They would be looking at data across all of these. It has them look at data as part of that. So what I think I can do is provide a better picture for you of what those targeted schools are going through. Now, what we've talked about teaching and learning is that that's such a quality process. Let's not wait until every school gets targeted. Like, let's start getting some of our teachers and staff into these training opportunities so that they can, if you're not a targeted school, do the same kind of walkthrough process to look at all of your data, which our HRS process supports. The challenge is with COVID and training and subs, that was all stuff you had to take people to the AEA for. And so we haven't been able to do that. So that's where the targeted schools are carving out time in their day. But as far as a school that's not on the targeted list, it's just a real challenge for them right now to say, hey, I'm going to send 6 teachers to this training at the AEA when we can't even get subs to cover that current day. So we're trying to brainstorm some ways we can better build this into professional development. You're going to hear some things from the calendar when we talk calendar with professional development. but our January was scheduled back last year, and so these would be conversations that we're gonna continue to work on in our March and April PD days as those days come up. I will get you the plan so that you can see the level of, it's very complex, it's very step-by-step, and it's data that has to be reported to the state. So there are action steps, there are plans, there are timelines. We upload those on an annual basis to the state. So I will get you a copy of that so that you can at least see, what those school improvement plans look like.
I guess I'm just looking for something, I guess I was just hoping that, enough time had passed that, you would be coming to us with, I guess, some more specifics on, some ideas and some real, something with teeth, I guess.
And that's
Nathan,
good
would it
feedback
be
to have. That's something that we can certainly provide. Wasn't aware that was something you wanted right now. We could certainly do that as time goes on, as those plans get developed in buildings beyond the identified buildings as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind having, in another couple of months, having
I was just thinking
another, a presentation where we kind of see what the progress has been, as opposed to, kind of waiting for that spring data, but having a conversation in between where we can see kind of what our plans are.
I wonder if we could just see maybe a proposed timeline of what are the steps that are planned, and what's the, if it's, we'll be developing a plan during these months, we'll be implementing plan during the, so that we can kind of just have an idea of what that process looks like. Because if it's gonna be it's gonna take us a year to develop a plan, then it'd be helpful to know that. Because we know that some of that is comprehensive, and if we're going to take the time to develop a really comprehensive plan and send people to training and all that stuff, we want it to be done right, but I think it'd be helpful to know what the time frame is in order to develop the right plan and go through all the proper steps.
Well, and are there stopgaps of how can we help kids now while we're formulating the master
Yes.
plan? Because I don't want to see one grade level of students, well, we identified the problem when they were in the testing year, but the plan took a while, and so then they just kind of moved through, and we just helped the kids after them. That's always my struggle with, and I know education takes time, so this is a my issue and not a system issue, but I always hate when do we see the impact? It takes so long.
Any
So-
short-term
And then just to make
interventions.
another point, particularly when we're talking about where the trajectory that 8th graders are being put upon, if we don't start addressing that immediately, the plan that they're on, it does create the trajectory. I mean, the classes that they enroll in for 9th grade can necessarily keep them from being able to take other classes that would be necessary. So, these problems, you know what I mean, they can have some longer term consequences, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If we don't at least have kind of that temporary kind of plan in place to address some of the more immediate needs.
I want to give everybody, sorry, go ahead.
Before Nathan wraps things up, I want to go back to your first slide, if you would, Nathan. I don't want this to get lost in all the other questions. I hear what you're saying as far as concerns, I hear it's identified. I don't disagree with anything you're saying. We know there's work to be done. That's without a doubt. But I think on the positive side of things, anytime anybody gets any data, we tend to go to the first thing to look at to try to fix. It's just human nature. We all do it. But I think I want to make sure to emphasize also, our school succeeded last year, and that shouldn't be lost in all of the details because of the immense challenges that were on each school and each teacher and classroom last year. I was concerned how these results would come out this year. I just didn't know. Never had a year like that, obviously, what they look like from a school performance profile piece as well. So there's a lot of positives on there as well as successes that we talk about closing that gap. That's always what we want to do, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that our schools were successful in the midst of a year that nobody's ever experienced before too. So I want to make sure to commend our staff for these results across the board as well, knowing there's still work to be done.
Agreed. I want to make sure Sandra, Clark, and Matt have a chance as well, if you have any questions or comments or anything.
I think they've covered it.
I have a question for you, Shannon, really
I
quick.
don't need to say the same thing again.
Just a question really quick. So we talked about how our math scores were, stronger than, and maybe it's a question for you, Nathan, I'm not sure. Our math scores are stronger than our ELL scores.
Other way around. Our ELA scores were stronger than our math scores were lower across the board.
Oh, is that what you?
Historically, that's not always been the case.
Okay, well, no,
Yeah.
because that actually kind of answers my questions. I was thinking about our math specialists that we brought in versus like our reading teachers, but for whatever reason, I thought that you had said at the beginning that our math scores were better, but if that's not the case, then my question is moot. So thank you very much for your
Clark or Matt?
presentation.
Anything?
The only thing I'm concerned with is I know our teachers are doing a great job considering what they've gone through the last 2 years. But like's been stated a couple different times, just to see how we could close that gap. My worst fear is anybody falling through the cracks when we have an opportunity to get them the help that they need. And if we have a program, I'd rather have it instigated sooner rather than later. And if we make mistakes, I know those are correctable quickly with those teachers that are involved in that. And it's just one of those things, you just don't like to see those kind of big gaps. But we're working on it. I think it's a new thing. I just would, if there was some way to hurry up the process without anybody falling behind, that would be great. And that's it.
Yeah.
I agree with what Rachel had said there. I like the idea of maybe coming back to this in a couple of months with just an update. Maybe not all of the data because you wouldn't have it probably, but of, bullet point lists of these are some of the things that these targeted schools are doing, and, just to give us a sense of, yes, things are moving forward and not just focused on the one thing that the state wants, but what the other data is showing need to be focused on as well.
My final comment, because what I don't want the message to be is that the teachers aren't doing enough, because that is not the case at all. So as you're looking at, my request would be that as you're looking at what trainings we could do or what project plans or tweaks or whatever we could do to figure out a way to do that doesn't add one more thing, but that complements or strategizes what is in place, removes what isn't working to replace. Like, I don't want to just add another layer onto our staff. So that would be my, let's do what we need to do to help the students, but let's not add one more thing. Just, that sandwich is getting really thick.
Yeah, we don't lose any staff.
So,
Haven't said.
so I am, this first page, I don't want to get into comparing buildings because I think across the district we have excellent people in every building and everyone's doing a great job. And this is one score. But after the year that we went through last year, looking at those colors on there it is very good. And I'm very happy to see them. I just want to make sure that those kids that are still in those little gaps, that we're getting to them too. Thank you.
Okay, good. I appreciate your feedback. Thanks.
Nathan, can I ask, this is a request if you have this or not. Are you able to drill down, you have this broken out by building. Can you break it down by building and then break it down by these? Can you email that to me if you're able to?
Yeah.
Actually, if you go to the Iowa Performance Profile website, anybody can access that by building as well.
By building?
Yep, any school in the state of Iowa you can get into, and you just keep clicking and digging deeper into. So if you can send you the link, I can include it in the upcoming memo
Cheryl
as
had that
well.
linked in her PowerPoint too, if you download the PowerPoint.
I think Nate looks at that, so I
Go there
can.
pretty quickly.
You can really get lost in it,
You can.
Lots of
Thank you,
lines,
Nathan.
Thank
drill
you.
down. All right. Next up, policy committee updates. The policy committee did meet twice since our last meeting, and I'll let Sandra or Rachel.
Well, we started out by going through all the 800s, and JT was our guide through that.
Actually, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe JT can explain the 800 series and then, he's dismayed with me.
We did a deep dive through the 800 series. A lot of the changes were Most of them were minor, either coming from the auditors or whatnot, changing some of the language around our procedures, whether it was travel reimbursement, things of that nature. I don't have the policy stuff in front of me, so I'm trying to go right through it. I apologize. But yeah, it had been 3 years since we reviewed the series, and there were some updates from ISB. We changed some language into budget review and things like that as well. We removed some policies that were redundant, some language there. And then in some of the policies where legislatively had changed, we made those changes as well as those policies.
Yeah.
I don't have my notes, I apologize.
No, but that's, I think that's pretty much, I mean, we looked at what was asked of us to look at, and then as JT's been working through all these different things, he realized some things could be streamlined, and that's what he was doing, and then looking at the language and trying to be consistent, because we had some things saying one thing, and then it wasn't quite the same, I guess, is a good way to put it. And then we went on from there and went down through some of the 200s, different things that we needed to look at and think about and talk about. And some of those have to do with, like our board manual and other things that go from there. What else would you like to say, Rachel?
Well, I think you covered it very well. It was a lot of...
Just a
it
lot of...
wasn't really a lot of heavy stuff. It was a lot of just some, minor changes to language, some small additions from IASB for instance, there's a new law at the state level that says that when you use hotels, that those hotels have to have a certification. They have to have a designation or certification for like human trafficking. So, making those, we have to, that's a new law, and so we had to add that. A lot of it was, like Sandra said, just kind of aligning things, making sure that something in one policy didn't contradict something in another policy, or just kind of clarifying them, or just cleaning them up to make them a little bit more understandable. And then there was some discussion about the board operations manual, and some of the things that we had been asked to talk about and look at from the last board meeting. So overall, and then Carla had some stuff that she had been working on that we had to go over as well. So overall, not a ton of real heavy stuff this go around. Britt?
I do want to address a couple just things that I know there might be questions on. So when we met with the auditors, or when they presented, when JT presented in December, one of our marks was with regards to just a paperwork process, that we had paperwork in place but not enough. And so one of the things that we've been doing to address that, you'll see in the policies for the conflict of interest. So we're updating that policy and addressing the request of the auditors, so that this is the first reading of these policies, so you'll see it again at the next meeting. But then we'll have that process in place to make that a stronger set of paperwork for the auditors to review next year. So that has been addressed. I do want to address 604.3. This was not a Linn-Mar written policy with regards to assistance animals, and everyone was just as surprised when we were shared the law. This is a law. This is not Linn-Mar policy, just like on a whim. So I would like to make that very clear. It's a law. And then I know Shannon sent out an email why 704 was removed. For transparency's sake, it was removed because it's back in the courts and the state is disagreeing with the federal government, and until they decide and we have more information, we're not talking about it. But again, that is a law, not a Linn-Mar policy. So there are only so many things that we can decide, and then there's the law. So those were conversations that were had at policy committee. If there are questions with regards to any of that, I think we would be happy to answer those if you have questions about that.
One thing about the addition of miniature horse, because we have gotten a lot of communication about that. I've heard a lot of that, as you said, that it was a law. But also, I just want to be careful to be very sensitive, because, you know, this is one of only 2 animals that are designated as service animals from the American Disabilities Act, and, you know, that these actually are, you know, life saving for some people. So I just don't want to make light of it either. I think it's gotten a lot of, like, it's been, you know, this, like, funny jab that people can take on it, but, you know, I just want to make sure that we are very sensitive to the fact that, you know, for some people that they need this, and, you know, we don't want to mock them in any way. So I just wanted to state that. And also, I wanted to ask JT, because I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I don't want to stick my foot in my mouth. So that conflict of interest form that we're looking at, that would be available to anybody who wanted to see that. Is that correct?
Yeah, it would be,
You would just have to make a request. Okay.
Thank you for clearing. So when I said we were surprised, I did
no.
not mean like
No.
laughing surprised. I know there's horse therapy camps, and that's a very common thing, and
Right.
I'm very supportive of that.
No.
It was just when it was placed in front of us, I went, oh, okay, I wasn't expecting that.
Yes,
So thank you for
I absolutely
clarifying.
understand.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Was the wording of that provided to us, or did we draft the wording?
No, the wording was
given to us.
provided.
Okay.
Typically, that's how things will come to us, is from IASB, and their attorneys have looked over, have developed that language in order to comply with the law.
Okay, thank you.
And we always have our attorneys review it as well.
Okay.
One more question on that conflict of interest form. You said will be available. What does it look like to get that? Is that how will people be able to find it?
If somebody wants to request it.
I'm assuming through the FOIA request, like normal.
So it will be a FOIA request, and not
I guess the board can authorize it to be made public somehow.
Yeah, I don't know how, that's something we've not had before, so it'd be new, but I think that would fit under FOIA request process as well.
It definitely is considered a open record.
Correct.
I can just say for myself, I wouldn't be opposed to having that more readily available for people, at least at the board level. Do you know what I mean? Having as opposed to people having to request it through FOIA.
I'm fine with that.
If it was, you know, if we had it somewhere on our website, or, you know what I mean, just somewhere that was a little bit more readily accessible.
Yeah, we certainly talk about as far as what those procedures look like. That's
Okay.
not something we have discussed really.
As soon as we know what we're doing with all of
Yep.
that and how it's going to
Okay,
look.
sounds good.
All right. Any further questions for the committee members? Okay, I will keep on going with Rachel and the Equity Committee update.
Okay. So the Equity Committee met last month on a day that I was traveling. I was able to be there for the first part of that meeting, and then I had a nice, long conversation with Nathan, and probably took up more of his day than he was anticipating, to get some good information. So the first thing that the committee looked at was there was a survey that went out to students, and, you know, asking them about their experiences with diversity and inclusion in the district. We had some issues with participation, and I hope that, you know, we'll kind of like figure that out. That was the first time that we gave this kind of survey, so, you know, it's a little bit of, you know, try, and then, you know, we have to make some adjustments. But Nathan assured me that that it's still good data, and that we are going to have some kind of results from the company. They're going to give us some opinions on that data in February. Another thing the committee worked on was an application process by which people from the community can apply to be on the Equity Committee. I know that we've had a couple of applicants. I'm hoping that we can get that out. We can share that. We have not as of yet, but I'm hoping that we can share that through our social media to allow people to participate in that process. Nathan and I discussed a little bit about the student data again, and the student data and kind of some of those barriers that we were talking about just here a little bit ago, those discrepancies, and you know, kind of talking about some things then that the equity committee could look at, you know, what perhaps they see as some of those barriers. I had been, Sandra, I thought, I had been under the impression that, that we were, you know, doing a job description.
Well, part of the equity committee and all that, we were, you know, thinking about, do we need someone to oversee this for the district? And if so, then what would that job description look like? And you really have to talk with a variety of people to figure out what is really needed and where we're at and what people think. And that's one of the reasons why this was created. So I think from all of the information we're gathering, we can determine that, yes, we probably need someone to oversee it, or, you know, I don't know if it's full-time or part-time or what, but it might be something we need to do in the future. And then maybe that this group can give some guidance as to the kinds of characteristics of that job that we need to see happen. I think that's the best way to say it.
So my conversation with Nathan said that that's not something that they were working on, but I didn't know if that is...
That was my impression that I was given before this began.
Yeah, that's, I can jump in with that. It was something we talked about a year or so ago, as far as as we try to give equity its full attention that we need to do. Is that a position that is something that's part of somebody else's responsibility? Is it a person's specific job to have with that? Are there partnership opportunities there? So we've had some explorations with different agencies around to see different possibilities there. You know, budget's always a factor we need to consider as well. So those conversations have been taking place, but probably not at the committee level so much, because as they define their work, that's going to help us make that decision as far as is that what level of supervision, direction does that need as far as leadership looks too. So something we definitely could talk about in upcoming meetings as well.
Rather, this person has more than one thing. They may have this part, but they may have some other thing for the district that we need them to be a part of also.
Correct.
But we don't know what it is we would be asking for until we decide on those characteristics. And also, yes, a budget is part of it. I totally agree. But this is a pretty important part of our existence right now. And I think it needs to be considered as more of a priority, just my opinion, that we need someone to kind of dig in. And I'm not saying the people that are involved right now are not doing a good job. Don't even go there, okay? I'm just saying that I'm trying to look forward and look for a person that is in it and understands diversity and inclusion and all those things, and they kind of know it and live it and are there, more so than maybe who we have involved now.
And something I can give the board more information on coming weeks. Like I said, I've been doing some legwork on this, not ready to make a recommendation at this stage yet, but it's
totally
something
get
that I'm not far away from having that conversation with you on that piece too. So
okay.
I think this is all,
completely agree it's a priority.
I think this is all very timely, given that we're heading into strategic planning for the district.
Absolutely.
And setting priorities as a district and as a board. So I think that this is, you know, you're gathering information that can be shared during that process. And you know, over the next few months, we're going to be finalizing what the next 5 years and what the goals for this district are. So this is perfect timing.
And I would expect the equity committee to be instrumental in leading that discussion of what that position should look like and what the.
That's why we created it.
Yeah.
Eventually,
Because, I mean, if it's an
initially,
equity
my
advisory committee
understanding.
to the district, they are the ones that are brought from this community with that expertise and
That's right.
guidance, and have the lived experience in this, and so I would lean into them for insight and leadership into this, because those of us sitting around the table are probably not the experts in lived experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Well, and I guess I thought we were a little bit farther along on this conversation. Like, I thought this was something we were gonna kind of move forward on, and I feel like, you know, I don't want it to be a situation where we continue to kick this can down the road. You know, especially when we're looking at, you know, one of the things we talked about at this meeting is this achievement data and the gaps in the achievement, and, you know, having somebody to really lead that work, who can bridge, you know, the work that the equity committee is doing also with what the administration is doing, what the, you know, the counselors are doing, et cetera. I think that person is, I think that's a much needed position, and it's something that we've been talking about for a number of years. So I hope that it's something that we're going to really move on in earnest. I thought that was kind of,
Well, I agree
thought
with
that that's
that.
what we were doing.
I agree, but I think that we need to, because this person can be, I don't know how to say this, right? But you don't want things just kind of dumped on that person. I think we have to be very specific what it is we're asking of that person, and we have to be realistic. What can that person, you know, what are their expertise? What is it we need with what we already have in place at Linn-Mar to do the best job to address these problems? And I think if we kind of look at it that way and not just, this person's going to do this and this and this, I think we have to, I don't know. Maybe that's just my impression.
I do think that we have.
At all. That's not the intent.
Pardon me?
Certainly not trying to kick the can
No,
down
I
the
know
road
you
on this
aren't.
topic
I
as
know you
well.
aren't.
It's-
And
I think that
Multiple factors were still.
we know we want to keep talking about what the district needs, and we're going to have that conversation in goal setting. And so I think for now, we know we're standing on this, and we're going to keep moving forward with it.
Sounds
But-
good to me.
I do have one question. Sorry, Rachel, you mentioned that there was an issue with data because of participation issues. What was the issue on participation?
So there were some, parents were able to opt out if they wanted to, and there were some that did opt out. But I think the larger issue was like students that could have taken it but just chose not to for whatever reason. It was given at the end of the day. So, you know, there was some suggestion that perhaps, you know, it's at the end of the day, kids are tired. I don't know, Nathan would probably be able to speak to that better than I.
Yeah, I mean, we just had a number of kids not take it. We were very purposeful in not forcing or requiring with the current climate that we're in for anybody to have to do that. And so it was left very open-ended, and we probably had not as many responses as we maybe got with our conditions for learning survey that would have been required. But I still think we have 1,600 responses, 7th through 12th graders. I think that's enough to formulate some data for the committee to work off of.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Roughly, what is the percentage that didn't take it or did? Roughly, what is that?
We were roughly 70% of kids taking it 7th and 8th grade and 30%, but I don't have those numbers in front of me. I'm just going off of what.
I'm just looking for rough.
Yeah, I think we were about 1/3 of each grade level at the high school.
Okay, thank you.
Marion City Council updates.
Well, mine's pretty easy. It says that I'm supposed to report on, like, December 16th. There was no meeting. That was easy. But there was one, the 20-something, the 22nd. So I looked at that, and there was nothing to do with Linn-Mar. So we can move on.
All right. Clerk?
Yeah, basically what they did is they did oath of office for the candidates for the council
pertaining specifically to Linn-Mar, but I think it was in today's paper, the interesting thing is Grant Harper, who is a former science teacher at the high school, is now a councilman. He's really into the technology and flew some of unique things over, but he caught the picture of the new trail, which does go through Linn-Mar, and how it's going to be done. But it gave you a bird's eye view of what that's going to be and how quickly it's going to be done, and incorporate that into the Seymour Trail, which, to be quite honest, is going to impact a lot of Linn-Mar people in the district to walk and bike, and they're going at it pretty quickly. So that was interesting to see. But
Awesome.
that was about it.
Okay. Hand it over to you, Shannon, for your update.
Yeah, I'll start with, winter's arrived obviously in 2022. We were thankful to get through December without having any weather issues. And what I want to do is just a very quick overview of kind of how the process goes. It's every year kind of, get a lot of questions about it when the first weather incidences take place. I want to just run through that quickly. And then we will be sharing this out social media-wise and website-wise with families as well, just so everybody's aware of kind of what happens. Basically, anytime there's a potential weather issue looming, we have 4 to 5 people out checking roads beginning around about 4 a.m. This allows us to really spread out and cover all corners of the district, in town, rural areas, you name it. It's amazing how it can vary from quadrant to quadrant, and even in town to rural, quite a difference every time. So I have continual conversations then beginning about 4:15 to 4:30 with each person that's out and about. I'm one of them. And we start touching base. I also touch base with other superintendents in the area, metro superintendents, and then our rural neighbors as well. We also connect with National Weather Service. They usually have a webinar about 4:30 in the mornings on those days. And then local meteorologists are good if we have specific questions as well. We really try to make a decision by 5:15 a.m. At the latest. I think that communication can then be set up by 5:30. It takes us a few minutes to get our systems up and running and everything transmitted by that time period. That gives families hopefully adequate notice. We really try to avoid doing a late start and then a cancellation on the same day. I know it's what happened on Wednesday. That is absolutely our last resort. The timing of some of those storms just makes it very challenging as well for some of those situations. When weather is a factor, we use the criteria the National Weather Service has put out for us essentially. If temperatures are projected to be 15 below at the start of the school day, we will look at delaying school, potentially canceling school for those really cold weather times for student safety, and for mechanical problems really start to pop up at that time. Our transportation director, that's the number that Mr. T gets nervous about with our buses. You saw on Friday, we were able to go to school after a late start. Iowa City tried, their buses weren't able to make it happen. Waterloo had the same thing. So that's just the reality of the cold with diesel buses sometimes. For wind chill, we use National Weather Service advisory. That kicks into effect when school is expected to start. If the advisory is there, we consider a late start. It's not automatic, but we start to consider it at that time. An advisory usually runs when it's 20 below to 29 below zero wind chill, not regular temps. If it is to be a wind chill warning, then yes, we will have a late start at the start of the school day and potentially cancellation. Wind chill warnings are typically issued when it's projected to be 30 below wind chill as well. So those are the guidelines we use. Every situation is a little bit unique as far as the timing of things, or just the road conditions. If it's been piling up day after day, those just always become a challenge. So we really try to give families adequate notice. If we can make the decision the night before, we will, but also don't want to jump too far ahead and then have the wrong decision the next morning and surprise people again. So it's just kind of the process, the reality of the winter. So we really try to make it a thorough process that we go through and be as careful to make sure if we can have school, we will, but if it's safety-wise, we don't think we can make it happen, then we do not. We try to be as consistent with the other districts in the area. There's a lot of overlap between families and just employees and everybody else that way too. We're pretty consistent with that, but not always is every district in the same spot. So after last week's events, we still have enough time built into our calendar to cover just under 4 or 5 more missed school days, so we have time. We do have snow days built into our calendar again this year, and that's very helpful for us as well. So there's kind of the brief overview of what happens. If anybody wants to get up at 4 or get up at 3:30 and join us sometime, it's kind of exciting. Not really, but it's interesting. So.
That one.
But then it's a process we take very seriously. I think a lot of times people think we just roll out of bed and look outside our window and like, yep, we're doing but that is exactly the opposite of that. It's 24 hours ahead of time. There's a lot of text messages and communications happening and all the way through that time as well. So it's something we take very seriously and try to get as accurate as we can. We know it's important. We want to have our kids in school, but we also know it's important to make sure it's safe too. So that's a delicate line sometimes. So.
I'm going to give you a little bit more credit than looking out your window. You are out driving in it, and so are the others. So I want to give you credit for that. I mean,
no, it's a good team to work with. Our team that gets out on the roads, they do a great job, and other superintendents we work with, it's the same thing. So it's a good group, and it does help to bounce ideas off of each other about what you're seeing or concerns, because it is, I mean, some days it's really easy, and other days you think you're doing pretty good shape, and 5 minutes later, like, holy smokes, I don't know if I can get my car through that road, and that changes your thinking pretty quickly. So that's just the reality, but thank you, but it helps to have a team tremendously on that. So the other topic I want to jump into a little bit is return to learn plans. It's not officially a return to learn, I guess, but just the topic of COVID in general, probably more so than anything. A couple things that have come out since last time we met. There's been some conflicting guidance from CDC as far as 5-day versus 10-day times as far as when people should not come to school. There's been some definite conflicting reports on that piece of it. So until we get some clarity, before we can get some other details figured out, we are going to stay with our 10-day plan right now. We can certainly revisit that over time. It's an ongoing process there as well. We just think until the guidance is consistent, we need to stay where we're at. The vaccine mandate for staff, Britt mentioned that as far as our policy that we were moving forward with. This continues to be a yo-yo game, which I hate. I wish that wasn't the case as far as the OSHA ruling being in effect, and then it's, of course, put on hold, and then we're told it's back in place again, and then it's back on hold again. But we want to be very careful with this, and very much so that we're compliant with what's there, but also not getting ahead of things either. And this constant back and forth has made it challenging. The Supreme Court had a hearing on this on Friday. Some initial comments. No decision was made yet at that time. But shortly, later on that afternoon, the Iowa OSHA group came out with kind of their stance as far as what will happen in Iowa. So at this stage, we decided let's pull the policies before we get too far ahead of things at this time as well. We'll see what happens with the Supreme Court ruling and potentially more guidance from OSHA as well too. So that's the reason for the policy change on a late notice. We try not to change agendas once they get out, but I knew this one's going to be potentially timing issue for us with the Friday Supreme Court hearing as well. So we will keep our eyes and ears open for that and stay in contact with our attorneys on what we need to do as a district and what we don't need to do. So. And then the last thing I'll just briefly touch base on, as we came back from winter break, had some changes in our plans. I do think they've gone well at schools as far as the changes we've made. There have been some hiccups and changes that we're reviewing and kind of revisiting as far as lunch procedures and what's working, what's not working, classrooms, just those type of things we'll continue to visit or revisit and see if there's things we can do to be as safe as possible for students as well without going away from our plans. We'll continue to work we're meeting with principals this week, and we'll continue that conversation as well to get feedback from them as far as what's happening in their buildings. There's a direct impact at schools of what's happening in our society. Our numbers are obviously up across the board in our local community, and they are in our schools as well. We are very well aware of that, and we'll continue to work on that front as well. We know there's a community impact with us as well with school. I did talk with Tim Charles, I believe is his name, the CEO and president of Mercy Hospital this morning. I had a conversation about where do things stand at the hospital level, the things we need to be aware of as far as our schools and our practices problematic with them. He said that now he does not have any suggested changes for us at this time, or recommendations. He did reiterate, like last year, that if there were situations where they felt like they needed help from schools or other parts of the community, they would be in touch with us at that point too. So that was an interesting conversation there as well that was helpful too. So we've had quite a few questions about where we stand with everything right now. And my thinking is we obviously need to continue to monitor, continue to make sure we're providing safe plans in place for our students and our staff, and also continue to be as consistent as possible so we're not going back and forth with families as well. So I know it's a topic I probably have some questions for from board members, so I will stop babbling at that point and give you a chance to ask any questions or share thoughts you may have on that topic as well. Or on the snow day topic, either one. Two fun topics.
Shannon, one of the questions I had was just around I really am hoping that we can keep schools open, and I think that's probably everybody's priority right now, is wanting to make sure that we don't hit that like IDPH threshold where all of a sudden we have to close schools again.
Yep.
And so I'm just wondering what you feel like, if anything, are things that we might be able to do that can sort of be those happy mediums that can sort of keep everybody, maybe not everybody happy, but everybody at a happy medium, finding some middle ground that would, if there are any mitigation strategies in the classrooms or in the buildings, whether it be cleaning or temperature taking or anything like that, that you feel like would help to identify cases if and when they rise, helping parents to identify when there might be an increase in spread in the school, in their particular school or in their particular classroom, so that they could maybe decide, gosh, I don't usually send my kid in a mask, but I'm going to start sending my kid in a mask. Those kinds of things. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on what we can do to make sure that, to the greatest extent possible, we can keep the school open, because I think that's ultimately what everybody wants, is to be able to make the best choice for their family and have the opportunity to send their kids to school.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely our goal as well. Honestly, my biggest concern for keeping schools open right now is our staffing challenges. But even more specific than that is our transportation department staffing. We're just, like we've been saying all year, we're just at a very thin margin of error in transportation, and the current variant of COVID, it spreads relatively quickly and easily, so that's could be a quick change for us all the time. So that's my biggest concern right now as far as keeping schools up and running and open on a regular basis, is our staffing levels. Our sub rates right now for teachers especially has been pretty consistent lately, about the 80%, 85% rate as far as being able to find outside subs to be able to come in and cover our classrooms. Times we're not able to find outside substitute teachers. Our buildings have great plans in place as far as having other teachers cover those classrooms. As well, other administrators or counselors. It is a true all-hands-on-deck team effort to make that happen, and they've done a fantastic job of that. It's never quite the same having a sub in the classroom, but I honestly have great confidence in our current subs that we have and our teachers that are filling in as subs, that they are doing much more than you see in the old-fashioned movies of just holding down the fort. There's learning continuing to happen there, and we're very thankful for our teachers and our subs that are making that happen on a daily basis, because they are critical to keeping our schools open and running right now, along with our transportation staff as well. So, and then as far as the other things I think we need to continue to look at other mitigation factors we can within our buildings. That's exactly what we're going to talk about with principals this week, is now that they've had 6 or 7 school days since the break, what does that look like? What's worked? What changes can we make? What do we need to revisit? What feedback are they hearing from people as well? So that's the opportunities we'll start to continue to look at, see if there's things we can do to either continue what we've done earlier, or even new ideas or things to change as well. And this is something I think we all hoped by now we'd be far beyond. Clearly that's not the case, so we just need to continue to reevaluate like we've done in the last almost 2 full years now of continue to reflect on where we're at, to monitor, and then adjust as needed, whether those are small changes or larger ones too. So I will keep you up to date as far as what those specific things look like that we come out of there after some discussions this week as well. So feedback I'm hearing from, and firsthand experience as well, I'd say roughly 50% of our elementary and intermediate schools were seeing mask usage as well, which is probably more than I expected after the requirement went away. It varies from building to building and day of the week as well. But that was interesting kind of to see on first impression too. So.
On that note, one of the biggest questions that I'm getting from parents is about the staffing and the subs and the quality quality of education continuing when we have the constant shifting in who's in charge of the classroom? I'm less concerned because I know the quality of our staff, but I still think that that's a worthy question to address. Is if we have a constant shift in who's teaching a subject, are we still getting the learning that we need at the quality and the rate that we need? Not the quality, that's the wrong word, but are we still making the progress that we need in those classes, or are we getting delayed because we have subs and staff out?
No, I think the pace of the learning is very consistent to what it has been throughout the year. Honestly, this year, obviously, we have sub-challenges like we have last year as well, but we're not to the level of staff challenges that we were last year. So some of that is because of the guidance on public health, on quarantining for staff and different things that way, but we have as many challenges we have this year. We're still in a better spot than we were last year in that regard, at least from the teacher perspective too. So like I said earlier, I think our subs have been invaluable to us. We picked up a few more after winter break, as graduates took place, and college students home were able to sub as well. So they've been some of our best subs, and a lot of times we end up hiring them for the future too. So it's a definite win-win. They're not just there to put a Band-Aid on things. They're there to continue the learning, and our teachers make that happen.
You touched on it a little bit, but I would not be doing my due diligence if I didn't bring it up. With the quarantine procedures, I've gotten several questions on the quarantine procedure that we have in place right now, where perfectly healthy kids with no symptoms, never had symptoms, never had a positive test, are being out for up to 20-some days. We need to think about that. In my opinion, we need to think about that. Kids have already missed enough school. We shouldn't be keeping healthy kids out of school. So I really strongly suggest we look at that, and with some other information that I have sent, that policy needs to be looked at in the return to learn plan.
The only thing I'll mention there is the up to 24 days essentially is the worst case scenario, and it's really in a situation, I'm going off of memory, so I hope I'm accurate on this. If it's exposure within the family for a student, non-exposure, but somebody essentially they're living with, and there's almost no way to keep separation that way, and it kind of cycles between family members within that same residence. So that would be a unique circumstance that doesn't happen very often, but yes, it has occurred. So that is the case, and that goes back to the different guidance we've received from CDC on 5 versus 10 days, because part of the 5-day requirement is if you're symptom-free and then able to wear a mask for the next 5 days, then their recommendation is that would be an option to return. That requirement of the mask piece would be challenging for us, obviously, as well, too. So, but yeah, those are things we'll continue to look at and see, because we don't want students to be out any longer than they need to be, and we don't want staff to be out any longer than they need to be either. So where's that balancing point of where's the right number of days to protect everybody, and also still get them back in school when we want to as well.
Yes, and I do think we need to look at what's required and who can require that as well. I think that's an important piece that we need to look at as a group as well. I don't think what was put in place when it was put in place was maybe looked into as far as it needed to be. So I would suggest that maybe we can look into that as well.
Let's continue to be a living document that we will continue to revisit and update as long as it takes.
Sorry.
Yep.
Can you clarify, so if we update the quarantine guidelines to align with the CDC recommendations of 5 days with the negative test plus 5 days of masking, they would be able to, a home exposure, like you were just saying, Matt, they would be able to return after 5 days of in-home exposure as long as they've got a negative test and they mask for 5 days after they return to school?
That's my understanding. I don't know if it 100% applies to the in-home situation or not, or just in general. It could be. I just don't feel confident.
That might be a nice alternative to offer to families that are in that situation. Okay.
Yep.
I've got a question for you, Shannon. You know, we've gotten all of us, I assume, have gotten a lot of emails about the issue of masking. And, you know, I wonder if, you know, that if we should look at some metrics in order to provide kind of some clarification for everybody, so that instead of this like kind of sort of constant anxiety that, you know, will we or won't we, you know, that we could put some metrics in place such that people, you know, could track this stuff themselves and kind of know where we're at. And I don't know exactly what those metrics would look like. I mean, my greatest concern is absenteeism and keeping our schools open and having enough staff to do that. But, you know, could we potentially look at, you know, College Community has metrics and Cedar Rapids has metrics, and you know, I don't know what ours would look like in relation to theirs. I'm not suggesting that, you know, we should take their metrics and use them for our own, but just, you know, just to kind of, I think, potentially ease some of this anxiety about going back and forth potentially.
Yeah, I've definitely thought a lot about the metrics as well to look to see where is that impact for us as far as what was the magic number, and I
Right.
think that piece of it too. That's a hard one to pinpoint right now, but it's something we can definitely look at and then at least take under consideration for the board. And then the question then becomes, okay, what next then? If we get past whatever metrics, what does that mean? Does that mean we can reconsider masks again? Does that mean we reconsider other metrics, other provisions we look at as well? There's lots of different ways to potentially look at it and what's the most impact we have from that perspective too. So
right, and it could
continue to look as because it doesn't seem like this is going to hit a peak anytime in the next day or two as we go forward too. So something we continue to look at and see what do we think is the right balance there essentially.
And I think along those lines, I don't think it has to be across the board, across the district either. And I think one of the things that I shared with you, Shannon, was I got a lot of communication from families sort of saying, I wish that the district was providing more broken down information at the building level, so that, especially at the elementary level, there's so many elementary schools that our dashboard right now is just at the elementary as a whole, and so it's hard for a family to be able to, if they're in a situation where maybe they've got a child who they're choosing not to vaccinate and they want to be able to decide, is this a safe time to send my child to school or not? Or they've got an immunocompromised child and they've got to be able to decide, is there breakout at the school? Is there not right now? Is it a safe time to be able to send my kid to school? Or can I send my kids vaccinated, but I want them to be able to go to school without a mask most of the time, but I'm going to mask when I feel like cases are really high. If they can make data-informed decisions, we want to be able to enable them to do that. And so if we could provide them a little bit more specific data that could help guide that. And I think that helps the transparency as well for us to be able to say, like, here's everything we know, and we know that the data isn't perfect. We know that not everybody's testing every time they get a cold or every time they've got the sniffles. And so a lot of people, one of the other pieces of feedback I heard was that many people are saying now they're not getting tested unless they need medical attention for COVID-related symptoms. And so our case rates at the district level are likely going to be lower than actual rates of COVID in the district. So we've got to take that also with a grain of salt. But I think it's one piece of information that our families could use to make informed decisions. And maybe looking at the overall absenteeism rates and not just the COVID numbers, publishing that information, I think would be really helpful. So a parent could say, and maybe that goes into our metrics that we use to say, all right, we are at 7% absenteeism, and if we get to 10, we have to shut the whole school down. So maybe when we get to a certain percentage, that's when we say that we're going to re-implement social distancing or masking or daily sanitization or whatever it might be. I don't know exactly what we need to do in those situations, but I think public health could really help us identify what those mitigation strategy should be that could be on a immediate, okay, we hit 7% for 2 days in a row or 8% for 2 days in a row, and if we get to 10%, I don't know how many days in a row you have to be at 10% to where we have to shut down, but I don't want that to happen even if it's for a day or two where we have to shut down, so.
Yeah, just because we get 10% doesn't mean it's automatic shutdown with the state for any absences. It just means we have to notify public health, and then they
So I think that
from there.
those are good conversations for us to then have, is what are the situations where public health recognizes this is a problem. If the 10% is the reporting threshold, maybe that's a good place for us to recognize that's a problem. So I don't know for sure what the numbers are either. I think that those are good conversations for us to have, though.
I mean, I think the importance of the metrics in these numbers that you're talking about is that, you know, we don't want people to feel like these decisions are just sort of arbitrary. You know, giving them that data helps them and helps us. You know, I think parents want information, and I want to be able to provide them with some of that potentially. And like I said, I don't have like specific, I'm not here to say like I have these specific metrics that I think that you ought to take forward, or that, you know, we have to do this, you know, this strategy or this strategy or this strategy or this particular combination of strategies. I just, you know, I mean, similar, and I know that it's not a completely apples to apples comparison, but, you know, similarly to what you talked about with your snow day and, you know, how we make these decisions, you know, giving parents a better idea of how we're making those decisions, and, you know, things for them to look out for, et cetera. You know, again, it eases the anxiety. There's just so much uncertainty. There's just been so much uncertainty, you know, for this entire pandemic, and helping to provide a little bit more certainty where we can, I think could be beneficial.
Yeah, I can certainly work on some metrics and reporting procedure, things for us to look at and revisit and share with the board for consideration as well.
And I think working with Linn County Public Health, like Melissa said, you know, kind of bringing in, you know, I don't know, you know, I have no expertise there. I just want to make sure, you know, it's driven by, you know, the people who know the science of it.
Well, I think, sorry, yawned in the middle of, not that you're boring, sorry. I think it's important to, as we're talking about gathering data and looking at numbers and potentially metrics and all of that, to also acknowledge that we're 2 years in, and it's very different right now than it was a year ago when we had our first metrics conversation as a board. And it's a different variant. What does that mean? How does that factor into the decisions that we have to make? You know, a year ago, I was the one walking in here with all of this printed out data and research, and there was more consensus then than there is now about what the right things to do are. So, you know, right after Thanksgiving, we came back from break. Everyone was in a mask. We saw a surge in cases, and then they went back down. Right after holiday break, people aren't wearing masks. They're not required anymore. We saw a surge the first week. I think that looking at what happens over the next couple of weeks, doing the other mitigation efforts in our return to learn plan that have not ended, making sure that those are still in place in all of our buildings. The only thing that ended was the mask mandate. There are still lots of things that are still happening to protect our staff and to protect our kids. And I do not want to make a rash decision or jump and make the wrong decision and create more chaos than is necessary. But I also want to keep our staff and our students safe. So I would like to exercise caution and gather as much information about the present version of COVID as we can before we start saying we're going to do anything. Because there's a lot, it's a lot to push back and forth, and it's a lot to say, I know I'm right. No one knows. because this new variant is this old. It just got here. So we don't know enough. And I'd like to say, let's get data on our absentee rates already. Let's watch where the numbers, like how many of our staff are out, how many of our kids are out. Are any of our buildings at risk of getting anywhere near 10%? Like what does it look like in our buildings? And what are we seeing? And in 2 weeks, Shannon, bring whatever you, Linn County Public Health, everything, we can talk about it again. I'm not gonna join I'm not gonna do a big rash jump here. It's very different than it was when it started. And we've already gone through this twice. If we do it again, it has to be for the right reasons and at the right, that's where I'm at, is I'm not gonna jump into that unless it's absolutely necessary and we're talking about closing buildings.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing from everybody is gather more information. And as we come out of winter break, these last week and next couple weeks will be good opportunities to gather that information and also look at some potential things for us to revisit as well. So I can certainly pull that together and bring that to the board at our next meeting in 2 weeks as well. So that I can definitely do.
Anything else on your update?
That was all I had.
That was all you
I
had.
always end with that one because I never quite know where that's going to take us.
Okay, moving on to unfinished, I'm sorry. Did anyone else have anything that they wanted to add to either winter, weather, chaos, or return to learn COVID? Okay. Unfinished business.
I make a motion to approve the plans and specifications for the Excelsior parking lot project and the stadium turf replacement project as presented.
Second.
All right, that is a motion from Rachel and a second by Sandra. Any discussion on either of these plans? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
Make a motion to approve the 2022-2023 school year calendar as presented.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the calendar?
I'll do a quick overview, just to some of the key highlights. The first day of school is scheduled on August 23rd, which is the first day allowed by Iowa code. Last day of school is scheduled on May 31st. There's one additional student day added on this calendar as compared to last year, so it worked out this time. We do have additional hours built in beyond the 1,080 minimum to allow for late starts, early dismissals, snow days, those type of things as well. There are a few more full-day professional development and comp days spread out through the calendar, not so front-loaded or back-loaded, which was still kind of we're finally catching up from the derecho year. We had to change all of our calendars there as well. And then we do have, I know a couple members of the committee were going to be here tonight and they ended up not being able to make it. So I think Nathan has a statement that they wanted to read as part of their thoughts from the committee, and not for just so much this year, but also in future calendars as well. Nathan, do you have their
Does that address
statement?
whether we're doing full day professional development or partial?
Yep, that's exactly what they're going to reference. So.
Yeah, so excuse me, these aren't my words. I just wanted to be sure to represent the committee. We had two teachers and an elementary principal scheduled to be here, but like Shannon said, they, for some health reasons, couldn't be here. So here's their statement. Tonight we're presenting the proposed 22-23 school calendar. The district calendar committee, consisting of teachers and administrators, met and had a discussion around quarter days, professional development, work days, and the conference window. Minor changes were made, and we're presenting the board with a traditional calendar for the upcoming school year, something very similar to what we've seen in the past. We would like it noted that during our committee's meeting, the subject of regularly 2-hour early dismissals or late starts was discussed. The district steps in providing professional development on professional learning communities is very evident. Both the teacher and administrators on our committee know this additional time will allow for more meaningful collaboration around student data, a deeper understanding of the state standards, and an improvement on current teaching practices, which will in turn have a positive impact on students' learning. This topic may be reflected in future calendar proposals.
And I'll jump into kind of a quick follow-up to that. Is administratively, we recognize we do not have enough time for our staff to work, to collaborate, to go through trainings as well. So that's something that we would be in support of doing some further study on that topic as well, to see how can we add more time on our calendar for our staff to prepare and develop as well. So we also know that any sort of change to a traditional calendar will have an impact on our community as well. So that would be a situation we want to take our time and not rush into it. Hence the looking at it a year ahead of time. So we will, you'll see more topics on this coming forward as far as opportunities for feedback from staff, feedback from families, feedback from our community as far as potential calendar changes for the 23-24 school year as well. So not exactly what you're voting on tonight, but I think the committee wanted to make sure that was an important enough topic that recognized time-wise so that we need to look at in the future. So
I think as the committee works on this, I just want to say that it's so important to ensure that our staff don't just have PD time, but have implementation time. That is the biggest thing I hear on this topic from staff is we get all the training and that's great, but we don't have enough time to figure out how to implement it.
I will second that. That happened all the time. And I know it got better, but I want that to continue because it is so frustrating because you get all these new things and you're all excited about them and they think after an hour's training you're like guru person. No. You know, you get there and you're trying to do it and you have a question and who do I ask and how do I do this? And I want to do the best. I want to, you know. So yes, I agree.
yeah, we would not disagree at all.
It's so hard. It's so hard.
So Shannon, you mentioned that we've got some extra time built into the calendar. How much extra time or how many extra days do we have?
I think it's just over 45 hours we have built in right now. So that's roughly 7-ish school days of time built in.
And that's time that's reserved primarily for snow days, or what is the intent or the purpose of that time?
Yeah, the intent primarily for snow days, correct, or late starts, early dismissals that start to add up. And then to address where I think you're going with that is could some of that time be used for staff work time? What we have started doing last year, are doing again this year, is for teachers. When we have a snow day now, we are not having the teachers make those days up. We're giving them work day on that day of the snow day as well. And we've gotten really good feedback from staff about the value of those days. We're gambling a little bit, so I'm not sure how many of those we're going to have, but that opportunity when it comes up has been a win-win as far as not having to tack a bunch of days on in June, which are not as productive as during the school year.
So so what are they doing? Are they doing professional development then
Nope,
during
they
that time,
have
or are they
time
having collaboration time?
That and time to work. So whether that's completing grades,
Okay.
report cards, planning, that is a
Contract day.
flexibility time for teachers
That's
to be able
awesome.
to do.
That's all I'm gonna say.
They worked well last
That's
year.
awesome.
And we'll continue to do that the rest of this year and likely going forward as well as calendars get approved.
If those work really well sporadically and are nice surprises, maybe that's something that scheduling a few of those, like this is a PD day, but it's a work day.
We don't have anything planned for you other than you work in your room and do what you need to do. What an idea
That's
that
exactly
is.
what last Wednesday did.
You know,
I wonder if there's a possibility to use a portion of the days that if we've got 7 days built in, was there consideration, I guess, of using at least some of that time for that collaboration time?
I'd have to direct that to Nathan and the committee work, so I'm not 100% sure about that. As far as the conversation on
I would doubt it.
Whether
I would doubt it.
45 hours is the right number or 37 hours, I don't know. So
The committee just really built off what we had done in the past for calendars. So we, like Shannon said, from derecho, we kind of front-loaded a lot of PD, and our teachers, we always do surveys of our teachers and our new teachers, and they said that was too much. And so that's why we tried to spread those days out throughout the year. We tried to be consistent, too, and have them on the same day. And so that doesn't always work out well, but we don't want a random day off on a Thursday in the middle of the week, so we tried to stick with Mondays. Does that answer your question? So what we've done is very similar in terms of professional development days and teacher collaboration days. Basically, all staff days that are non-student days are similar to what we've done in the past. They're just at different spots at intervals throughout the calendar.
and 7 may seem like a lot of days, but if you have 3 late starts, early dismissals, which I'm sure we'll probably have more than that, that adds up to be a day pretty quickly. So it doesn't take long to chip away at that time.
How much of our, the PD time, we traditionally call PD, how much of that is like actual PD versus collaboration time? Do you know? Do you have like a guesstimate?
It's varied so much from year to year. 2 years ago, I'd say it was almost all PD time because we were coming out of the derecho and had to teach staff and work staff online, how to teach online, those type of things. So that was so heavy that year. That was an abnormality compared to most time. It varies depending on which team you're on. Certain departments have more professional learning based on what year it is or what curriculum adoption it is. I'd have to go back and look, Rachel, as far as, I'd hate to even make a guess. I don't know off the top of my head.
I ask just because, you know, I feel like I've heard it a lot, and I've heard Sandra and Clark talk about it a lot, that kind of need for collaboration, that ability to collaborate kind of on a more regular basis. Not for, you know, not for necessarily like implementing things that come out of PD, but just to like communicate with, you know, if I've got a student who's having a hard time, I'm their English teacher, maybe I want to collaborate, you know what I mean? Maybe I want to have time with their math teacher so that we could, you know, kind of team up on some strategies or things of that nature, so.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing you guys say is you empathize where the teacher's coming from on the request and principal coming from on the request to look at our dismissals, and that's exactly, we would agree with that, and we completely recognize that's a need. But we also know that has impact with communities. We think it's really important to take that time and get some feedback on that and design what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hence the reason for it. We wanted to commit to that study of that now, so it doesn't sneak up on us again next year in the same exact position, basically. So.
Sounds like a plan.
Any other questions or comments with regards to the calendar?
Nope.
The one we're approving or the one we are envisioning?
Not at this time.
Okay. So I have a motion from Rachel, a second from Melissa. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Make a motion to approve the acceptance of project completion and final payment for the following construction projects that were a result of damages from the 2020 derecho. Boulder Peak Black Hawk Roof Company Incorporated, $46,469.95. Hazel Point Black Hawk Roof Company Incorporated, $25,772.55. Indian Creek Dry Space Incorporated, $12,630.45. Wilkins Dry Space Incorporated, $13,155.30. Oak Ridge Dry Space Incorporated, $13,881.20. Linn-Mar High School Dry Space Incorporated, $2,692.75. Aquatic Center Dry Space Incorporated, $21,836.35.
Second.
Any discussion?
I should have looked at that whole motion before I decided that I was going to be the one to make it.
All right. So any questions about anything? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So now we have a continued discussion about our facilities planning and 10-year capital improvement. You do have a handout. So back in December, we heard from a student and a couple other committee members explaining the process that the facilities committee went through and kind of their priorities. And what we have now is some very, very estimated estimates. And I'll let Shannon and JT jump in on these numbers and what our next steps are.
I think estimated estimates, it's a nice way of saying it. First of all, the document you have, it's probably the second page, I think, if I didn't give that quite in order. The second page is the pictures. That, just a reminder for you, back in December when the committee representatives were here to walk through the recommendations from the committee, this is what they brought forward. This is the summary page from that group. So everything you see listed on this recommendation page is now shown on the first page. Nothing's changed on this image. Just want to go back to that as far as where we got these numbers and why we pulled those. The actual front page of your packet that you have there shows each of those projects now broken down with two things, essentially. So the capital projects listed on the top portion of that page, those are projected costs, and you will see a significant range. That's intentional. The dollar amounts here were pulled from OPN to begin with, and then, as you note, the asterisk at the bottom of that box, it's also been adjusted a little bit to show design fees, construction costs, and the big one of furniture, fixtures, and equipment as needed. But again, we have not gone out to really break those down. Those are very much estimates. So you see each item listed there going across. We did break out the high school extension, LRC repurpose, and the LRC relocation as two separate things. So you can see the cost difference of what those would look like. And then high school tennis courts, performance venue, north parking lot, and so on down the list. You can see the low range estimates and the upper range estimates. Again, those numbers are our starting points for this conversation. So you see the range of essentially $48 million to $60 million total cost for those projects. And if you go to the bottom portion of the page, it talks about the funding we will have available over the course of the next 10 years. And anytime JT projects that far out, there's some things you're estimating the estimates as well and making some assumptions. So he's listed there for you for those as far as what they would look like. And just the first one, I want to make sure to note that all of these funds would be looked to be borrowed from SAVE. So we're not talking about a bond issue. We're not talking about tax increase of anything. These would be one set of sales tax dollars going to fund these projects. So if you look at that number of $56 million towards the capital projects, that's what's estimated to be available over the course of the next 10 years as we update our 10-year capital improvement plan. JT, did I summarize that at least at an adequate level for an amateur compared to you? Okay.
Yeah, to Shannon's point, it's difficult to project funding. I think that the question that I worked with Piper Sandler on is, okay, if we had to borrow today, would we have enough money today to be able to fund these projects? And the answer was we would be within that range to be able to do that. So that was kind of a starting point. As Shannon mentioned, we're at a very 30,000-foot level on costs and funding. At this point, we haven't, contracted OPN or any other architect to do detailed design work. These are just very, very much rough estimates of what these projects might be.
So the high-level estimates came from OPN, or you, or?
They did a cost estimate of only the construction cost. Like basically, hey, I think the building might be this square footage. What's the average square foot cost? They did something to that effect. And then I added some costs for design fees. So the costs, well, obviously, we're not just going to build
Materials.
We're going to put things in it. So it's going to be a certain percentage. So.
What's your confidence level in the range? That it would fall somewhere in that range?
Given that we are in uncharted territories in a construction environment, my confidence level is very low.
Okay.
I mean, really, I know these projects that we approved today for the Excelsior parking lot in Stadium Turf, I'm just as curious. We have estimates for those, but it could be. Very low confidence right now, just given all that.
Is that the range cost estimate, like, we should kind of sort of ignore as I mean, it's a best estimate.
It's a best estimate
at this
for
point,
today.
but our confidence in that number is not real strong at this point because it's just such an unknown territory.
That's such
for
unknown
our
territory
economy right now,
and
especially construction.
And we haven't gone through any sort of design. We don't know if, like, for example, the indoor activity center or the performance venue. We don't know
Yeah.
how big those are really going to be. We don't know what we're actually going to do in them. So it's.
Yep, okay, fair enough, thank you.
And then to add one more factor to that too, to Melissa's question, the very bottom one on the capital project list is the high school extension LRC repurpose. So this building essentially, what are we going to do with it? And what's listed here is really a new construction type of a cost. If we would decide to repurpose this building, obviously that would be a different range than this as well. I'm not saying I would recommend that or not, but just keep in mind that there are different things we could still look at down the road as well. Those would be other factors for us to consider.
So JT, the 56.2 million is all from SAVE at this point, but we have used other funds for construction in the past. Can you talk to that?
We have, like for the high school renovation, we borrowed against Pebble. We can only borrow up until it expires, so it expires in 2025. So if we wanted to borrow against Pebble, we would need to ensure that that's renewed through the voter process. We can use funds, like for the tennis courts, we can use a portion of our Pearl levy to do some outward. But really, we have to keep in mind too, we have existing buildings too.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to
Do maintenance and that kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was just trying to remember all the different funds that we can use for these types of projects, but absolutely, in that same vein of current buildings and those, we also have to think about the projects that aren't on this list that we may have to consider in the next 10 years, like an 8th elementary, or what's our preschool situation if, the program goes from half day to full day. And so those are all things that we have to keep in the back of our head, and think about what that looks like. Land purchase on the west side for another, like all of that is still, just because it's not on this list doesn't mean it's not something that we have to consider when we finalize a 10-year plan.
Yeah, and that's a good point as well, because really what our goal is to come out of this is a priority list as far as what do we want to attempt and commit to first, and then what do we commit to farther down the road, knowing full well that whatever we put on that 10-year capital improvement plan is always subject to change. So we're not locked into anything saying we have to build this in this time frame. Things change. We've seen that drastically the last several years. So it's there intended to us to give us a planning and a budgeting tool and a communication tool for everybody. But really until we start to finalize bids and lock in plans, everything is subject to change as well. And to your question about Pep, it's a great question. I think it's great to have that knowledge for us. But I think the commitment piece for us is the 1 cent sales tax save dollars is really the only area I'd be comfortable committing to those dollars for these projects, knowing we may use Pebble and many need Pebble in other ways, and I would not want to tie our hands in that situation. Now, that doesn't mean somewhere down the road some Pebble dollars aren't used for a project or two. Maybe in the situation down the road we're better off doing that, but I would not want to budget or plan for that. I think that would be irresponsible for us.
So as we were talking about what this next phase of this process looks like, it was suggested, and I tend to agree with the suggestion, that tonight we discuss what the committee talked to us about, what our questions are going into, what it would look like to prioritize, and then send it back to a subcommittee of the facilities committee to go get those details before the board makes any firm plans, because this isn't enough to make a plan and say, oh yes, we should do this and not this. I think that tonight would be really helpful for all of us to get our questions out, to get our thoughts out on this process, and then to send it back to JT and to Shannon and to some committee members to dig in and say, okay, what does the inside of this look like? What would the plan be for this, and get more concrete numbers? So I would like to open it up for discussion and questions on anything you heard from the committee members at our last meeting, or questions you have now for JT or Shannon, or Clark and Sandra and I served on the committee, so we could also answer some questions as well.
I think one of the questions I have is around the performance venue, and I think I might have asked this last time, but just a little bit more detail around the specifics of that venue in terms of what our vision is for that. Are there specific, I know we need a larger auditorium, but beyond that, I haven't really heard what our needs are for this space, and so I'd be curious in hearing a little bit more about.
What we had for the auditorium in my notes here was we were thinking at this moment around 1,200 seats, and we have 800 in the one we have now. I think that's the comparison.
Yep.
So it gives you a little bit of what we have now versus in addition 1,200. Located in the front there where it's now parking and that, pretty much, and that it would be attached and therefore it'd be kind of a complex in a way.
And will it just be an auditorium, or will there be other things in that building in addition to the auditorium?
That's
No,
kind of to be determined.
To be determined, the initial design estimates were auditorium is the primary piece. There would be some additional restrooms and common space area as well, but not classroom space was not part of the initial conversation. But yeah, there's still, once we get the design phase, those things can all be revisited, obviously.
In listening to, the performing arts group and kind of their needs, aside from just the actual complexity and overlap of holding events there and how all the students can't be there at the same time and you have to switch out the parents that are watching the different groups before the next one can perform, there's also, the orchestra needs to rehearse and they need it set up on the stage, but then the show choir has to move everything and bring out their, and if we have the new space, but we're not getting rid of the current auditorium, and then we have the small one, it creates more classroom space that isn't traditional classroom space. They can set up in different areas and have those rehearsals without having to tear down the other group. It allows for more events to be held in an actual performance venue as opposed to a gym, which we have some of our schools holding concerts in their gyms because we don't have the capacity to hold everything in a performance venue. So that's some feedback that we received on the committee with regards to the performance needs.
I was trying to put it in context of price and why that particular aspect was so much more expensive than everything else.
Oh, I can.
When we were thinking of like a whole high school, I think you had said like the high school, that this would be a new high school extension building, and that's a whole building with classrooms and everything, and then a building with one auditorium is like twice as much, and like $20+ million just
You have to
feels
figure
like,
out what goes in it.
like
So,
that feels
I
like
mean,
a
the seats
really
alone.
expensive auditorium.
So you've got.
So, not that I don't believe that
No,
it's
it's
important, because like we're a music family and I am a music person, but
No, it's a legitimate
really
question.
expensive auditorium.
So think about when you're in an auditorium, you see the seats and you see the stage. What
you
you
have
don't see is behind the
acoustics and-
stage. It's very, very tall. You've got all of the inner workings of the lights and the curtains and everything that's going on backstage that none of us see from, and that's by, then you've also got, think about how tall a performance venue is and all the lights and the electronics and everything that makes, the acoustics, everything that makes that work. We don't see it when you're in there, but you wouldn't hear or experience it without all of that going into a venue like that. And then you also have the booth that controls it all.
Yeah, and they're talking, at least in the initial stage, in our discussion, it was around 45,000 square feet. So, I mean, it's a big venue. It's not tiny, so.
The 1,200 person to 1,250 person auditorium is a big auditorium as well, so that's part of it. And then the other piece that's a little bit unique here is, Sandra mentioned location on the side of the high school. There's some mechanical pieces there that are currently there, and they're going to have to be moved to a different location, which those at some point are going to need to be upgraded anyway. So this would cover that cost of those mechanical pieces too. And I don't know the exact dollar amount of those off the top of my head, but I know those are not cheap either. So that's part of it. It's not just the venue, it's the other pieces that go along with it in that situation too. So.
Thank you. Just need to wrap my head around that a little
It's
bit.
hard. And I only know that because I've been in that world for so long. But if you're not, then you look at a big empty space with a big empty stage and you go, why is this more expensive than 6 classrooms? And you also have the elevation factor of engineering, how all that works. So, additional thoughts or questions on any of the projects or?
Not at this time. I think I expressed some of mine before when we were first doing this, and
We were pleased overall with the fact that the anticipated saved dollars would be in the range to cover. That was something we really were not quite sure if that would be where our prioritization would have to start and stop necessarily. So the fact that it's at least within the ballpark is relatively good news at this stage of the game, I think.
And I also brought up the
gonna sound maybe silly, but I think this is more for the patrons of the district, and that is when some of these things finally get completed, we need to do very similar to what the city does when they get funds from the state and the federal government and it's completed and they put up a sign, this is due to, you know, the 1 cent sales tax. We need to remind them what JT has put up there and what we said about the SAVE funds, so that there's no confusion, open communication, open transparency, there's no increasing in your taxes, but it gives the patrons of the district, okay, they're doing this, the ones that don't pay attention, and all of a sudden, oh, we've got that bill, and this is how they did it, and that's good because my property taxes. In other words, just kind of put something out there. As each project goes, we don't build a sign for everything, we'll just move the sign. Okay? You make one sign, make it portable, then we just move it as each thing is completed. It sounds silly, but it reinforces what the board's trying to do and keeping the patrons of the district abreast of what's going on and how we got there.
I think that's a great idea. So some thoughts that I have, I think that there are some things that we definitely need to dig into, and there are some things that we can say, you know, if we get some numbers, we can move forward. I'm thinking high school parking is probably something that we can get some more numbers on and move forward with relatively quickly. If everyone is comfortable with the picture on page 2 and what those suggestions were. I'm also, like,
have to, do the tennis courts before you can?
well, I think one of the parking options is the old softball field by the stadium.
Okay, right, so
that would be something. And then the tennis courts is another thing. So I know we heard from one concerned concerned citizen about moving them off campus. And I do recognize that concern, and I don't want to dismiss it, but I also think that from a budget standpoint, moving them to Oak Ridge with the facilities already there is the right decision. But I also think that considering when we look at what goes in the activity center, can there be a tennis component set up at times to provide that space? And then I would like someone at some point to look at what it would cost to fix Excelsior. If those tennis courts are not the way they should be, what does it take to fix them? Because it's not on campus, but it's campus adjacent, and that is another way to look at that. But yeah, I think tennis courts and parking are the two easiest ones to say, let's see what that would look like and move forward. And then really dig into what all the other ones actually look like. I need a plan on the indoor activity center. What goes in that square? Right now we have a square with some square footage in it, but I don't know what's in it.
And that's why I think it needs to go back to a smaller group to really dig down to specific things, and then bring it back to the board on, here's what we envision or would recommend in the next 1 to 2 years, and then phase it out after that point as well. So that prioritization piece is critical for these first steps.
There's been so many things thrown around in the discussion time when we were involved, from within that, and a part of it as more weight room, or changing it to a weight room, or doing, part of it and extending and making what's there a different thing. So, I mean, it may involve more than just that one space in order to really make the whole area work the best.
I need more information on that project before I feel comfortable moving forward with it.
I'm not saying we don't need it, I'm just saying we need more.
I need to know what we need.
Yeah.
Right now, we know we need a space.
Yeah.
What's in that space?
Yeah.
Can I just?
And the flexibility of the space.
So we can provide some to help with that process. So.
I just want to add on that really quick that, we've had presentations by the ADs for a couple of years now. We've talked about that, the intramural, let me get that out, program, the possibility of that. From my perspective on that, I don't want to move forward, or I don't think I want to move forward on something like that unless that we are expanding the, I don't want to just do more for the same students who, I want to expand those programs so that more students can participate in those programs. And I want to make sure that that's like a top priority,
That
and
would
perhaps it
absolutely
is.
be the intention of
Okay.
that. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Can I ask JT a question really quick? And I really apologize if it's been answered while I was out of here for a moment. I see the upper cost estimate, and then I see these saved dollars, but we're going to be doing these projects over a number of years, and I wonder, these are the cost estimates for today, but we're not going to be doing all of them today. And so what impact will inflation have on these numbers? Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean?
Obviously, the cost will
Yes,
increase
right.
as time goes by. To
Right,
what
so
extent, I don't know.
I mean, because just to be totally honest with you, it does feel then like I'm looking at that 56 million, which is not 60 million, and that 60 million could be 80 million for all we know. Then add inflationary costs to that as we do a project today, and then we do one in 3 years, and then we do one in 7 years. And I do think it does make me feel a little leery that we're going to be able to get all of these things done just within these saved dollars, which may mean that we have to put them off until we can afford. I just don't want to promise the sky, because to me, I'm thinking that like something's gonna get cut here, or it's gonna have to go into the next 10-year, capital improvement plan.
That's the reality, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
But also keep in mind too, as we move forward, we're going to continue to pay off our existing savings.
Right, and we'll have more. Right. Correct.
So there will be different factors happening.
Okay, so is 56.2 million what we could borrow today?
Correct.
Based on our projections? Right. And then, let's say, just for example, so 5 years, perhaps we can, we will, I'm sure, a number of times refinance our bonds. Maybe, I'm not exactly sure what the market looks like right now. I mean, again, inflation, so the cost of borrowing money is more expensive, but like we could we would borrow for those, 5 additional years of future dollars. Is that kind of how it looks like?
You're going through like the whole list of factors that.
Okay.
That's why when Shannon asked me to put something, we had to do it based on today, because so
right.
Whether it's
right.
on the financing side with the interest rates changing,
right.
With those what's going to happen, construction environment changing.
Right. It just makes me think that, it's a little bit different. Okay, if you know that you can afford all of those things, you may prioritize them in a certain way. If you are, told that you may not be able to get all of those, then you may prioritize them differently. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, we could say, let's go ahead with the tennis courts, and let's go ahead with the high school parking, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, I'm just using that as an example, because that's what came up. But then if you know that you're not going to be able to afford something, you got to knock something off, then maybe you say, well, maybe we don't need those tennis courts right now. And I'm not saying we don't need them, so don't email me. Maybe we don't need that high school parking, which I'm not saying don't email me. But you know what I'm saying?
But also, without going through a detailed design process, I've seen projects here while I was at Linn-Mar, or even before I was at Linn-Mar. I just started out at X, and by the time it got through the design process, it was 3 times more. So,
right.
I mean, that's going to factor into, again, priority order and whatnot. I mean, you may put, $6 billion for LRC relocation.
Right. Right. Right.
The performance would be maybe 20 million isn't enough
right.
for a performance.
Right.
So I think that this is exactly why
Yeah.
it needs to get sent back down.
Is that what you're talking, I mean, I was just gonna ask, are you gonna do like a kind of a subcommittee for each one of these things? Or,
Well,
I
it
mean,
would
some of them
be-
probably don't need.
Not at this
No.
stage.
We would take it back to the smaller group, and we would dig into, okay, what would this actually look like? So what hasn't been factored in is actually, like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but OPN hasn't, sent anyone out to the old softball field and done like the actual land survey thing to see what we would have to do. Would that work? Hasn't sent anyone over to Oak Ridge to inspect and grade and all those engineering, construction things that I don't know how to talk about, haven't been done yet. So I heard the chuckle. So that's what the committee would look into, is getting those, digging deeper into what would each of these projects actually look like. But we wanted the board to be able to ask those questions and know what the committee should be digging into, in addition to just, how do these become something?
Right, and I think the cost is just so important there.
Mhm.
So
Oh,
if we have,
absolutely.
but I don't know to what degree, like, each of these individual things needs, the parking lot needs less, input potentially than like a performance venue, right? Like, the projects are different. So I was just trying to.
Well, it also, I think.
Prioritize these tonight, correct?
No, this was just a feedback session to see what your questions were after hearing from the committee and seeing the numbers and being able to pepper JT with questions he can't answer, because that's always fun. But seeing what we need to look at and what the committee needs to dig into to provide more information, so that when we do come back, we can say, this is what this project would look like in reality. This is today's numbers.
Will we know what it costs as well at that point?
Well, if we did it today, we would know. We'll have an idea of, well, if we went and
Right,
built it
right,
today.
right. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Well, and then the time frame of, kind of like building blocks. If we did this in this order and this, like, we have to do this first. If you want to do this, you've got to do this.
Right, yeah.
So getting their input on that as well. What,
A timeline.
Yeah.
Correct.
how long would each
Right,
project take?
yes.
If we're gonna, we have to build the new tennis courts before we can demolish the old ones.
Correct.
So what does that,
Yep.
what does that all look like?
Yep.
I think one of the things that honestly is going to be an unknown for all of us, including OPN and whoever else, is going to be supply chain issues, and if or when we will be able to do some of these things. So
That's true.
we can put together a timeframe all we want,
Yeah.
but that doesn't necessarily mean that we'll be able to implement on that. So,
When
and I don't think the smartest person in the country knows when that's going to be. So.
Well, and again, if I remember correctly with the two newest buildings, the first year is design and planning. So it's not like we decide this today and then tomorrow they break ground on a performance venue. Like, there's the whole design, planning, surveying process. It's a while before we go.
Those detail stages won't come for a long time yet, and those details include cost. And so we're going to be working with loose numbers for a while, but that's okay, because it gives us enough to get started on the priority list and a rough timeline, knowing that we're going to have to adjust at all phases of this process. And that's why we prioritize it, because there are certain things we know we want to get done relatively soon, and we can start to move forward in more details on those. Because really the end goal for us this year is we want to get all of these things here on our capital improvement plan at some point for the next 10 years, and figure out where does that fit and what other items need to be on there. And then that gives JT the opportunity to start taking not just the SAVE dollars, or the PEPAL dollars, PEARL funds, and try to figure out where those other obligations fit as well. Again, knowing we're never going to check off that 10-year plan perfectly, but we know we can start to begin to move forward, hopefully on some of the easier ones a couple of you have mentioned right away, I think, too, which is anytime you get some progress started, that helps as well.
So that was just going to be my last question to you. When you talk about sending these back out to some people to drill down a little bit more, what do you think the timeline is going to be? When do you think they might be able to come back and give us some more information? And then, again, an estimate, because, life, but when do you, can you give me kind of a rough timeline of when you think we might be able to break ground on, like, the first project, whatever that project, is.
Let's
Like
say-
how soon are you
let's
looking?
say the
Actually,
first,
I'm with
let's say-
OPM tomorrow.
Yeah,
So I'm
hopefully
hoping
this
that
summer.
I don't want to get the cart ahead of the
Okay.
horse
Yeah,
until
yeah,
this
yeah,
summer.
yeah.
So I actually have a meeting scheduled with them tomorrow that I hopefully get some of those specific things at least figured out on a rough timeline.
Okay.
I can then share back.
Okay.
I cut you off, there's one
no,
minute, so.
I was going to say,
That'd be perfect.
again, not saying this is the order we would do them in,
Yeah.
but let's say we do tackle the softball parking lot and the tennis courts. That could be started as soon as school is out in the summer. But the goal is to
We'll
have,
start this year. We've missed, nothing will start until
Bid-wise.
2023.
Yeah, well, that's what, okay.
okay.
Because of
we
the
missed
bidding
the-
time and, yeah.
Okay.
So I figured.
I can tell you.
Maybe a
I
parking
mean,
lot.
we may not even get
Maybe
the
a parking
project
lot.
for bid now.
Okay,
Done
Well-
then? Really? Wow.
okay, truth over there.
So we're a year out.
Voice of reason.
So either way.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's, the goal of the 10-year plan is for us to finalize that by the end of this semester.
Correct.
So whether we start
We're still on
anything
time for that.
or not. And
Okay.
again, some of that could be, we could start on design and not build anything.
Right, right.
All right, so is everyone comfortable with going back to the smaller committee and bringing more information back to the board
Yes.
mid-semester?
Yes,
Maybe sooner? We'll just see how it goes?
yes.
Okay. Next is the continued review and approval of the board operations manual. It says I'm going to facilitate this on here. So before we dig in, I've given a lot of thought to what I thought was a very productive conversation at our last meeting. And I know we went back and forth, especially around the communication section, and the different preferences that people have and the way that everyone thinks a little differently about it. I've been really thinking about there was suggestions of certain policies, there was suggestions of how things should go, and I'm just going to throw out my thoughts that I've been permeating since our last meeting, and then I'll open it up for you guys to tell me I'm right, tell me I'm wrong, whatever you want to do. I don't think that more policy is necessarily the answer to this. I think that everyone on this board has their own style, their own approach. I understand the historical precedence and preference of past boards in the way that communications was handled, and I respect those board members and the past board members and the reasons that they did that. I will say that since my first day in this role, I have disagreed, and my personal process has been to find a middle ground where someone communicates with me, I respond. Someone communicated as a whole, I gave Shannon the response first, and then if needed, I communicated. That was my way of maintaining my promise to communicate back. That was a difficult transition in some terms, because not everyone agreed with me when I did that. So I would find it very difficult to now sit 2 years later and tell other new members, you can't do this, because I've been doing it for 2 years, and I understand where you're coming from. So I think at the heart of this operations manual is our code of ethics and our professional conduct and our expectations of each other. And I think that a code of ethics and expectations is where we need to go. Everyone has their own style of how they're going to do that. And as long as you're working within the code of ethics that we agree upon in this manual, I don't think that there's a necessity to add additional policy or to try and frame how each of us chooses to fulfill this role. We know how to be professional. We know how to interact. And as long as we're doing it within the framework that has been provided, I see no reason to add more policy. That is just my preference, my thought on this. Just do the right thing and remember that why we're here. That's where I've been thinking after our very long conversation last time. So, thoughts? You can disagree. I'm good with that. I just wanted to share what I've been thinking.
So I have thought a great deal about this and had some really good conversations. I will admit, perhaps I was feeling a little reactive when we first discussed this, but like I have really had some time to think about it, and I think that we can set the expectations within the code of ethics, you know, like you discussed, Britt, you know, but we really can't limit people's free speech. I may not agree with what another board member says. I may not agree with what another board member does, but so long as what they're doing doesn't violate their ethics, I think that people have to be allowed to share their opinions and communicate with constituents, and I don't want to, nor, you know, I also question the legality of doing anything that that prevents a board member from exercising his or her free speech rights. And you know, I think the manual has done a good job, I guess, for a long time, and you know, I think that we are going to see some shifts as new members come on board, and you know, we can police certain things, but we can't police others, and you know, that's it. I don't want to belabor the point. So
To the legality point, we did, the policy committee, because the board did table several things and send it to policy, and we did look over what those might be. We did run the entire guide by our attorneys for that very point. And the feedback was that nothing is a violation. It all looked good. So.
Was that with the changes that?
Yes.
Some of the changes we talked? Okay. Okay. The key thing is it is a reflection of policy, which is either aligned with Iowa code or even if it's not, it's still board policy, so this does not overrule that.
Right.
So this is more of a summary document of that piece. So, there wasn't any concerns from that level.
That's good. That's great.
And I agree with everything Rachel, Britt, you both said. Granted, just like Rachel said, none of us are going to agree with what everybody else says all the time. But it's important that different viewpoints are heard. I agree with, you know, we can all work inside the bounds of the policy that is put in front of us here. I don't see anything here that is concerning that way. But all of us have had people put us in this position because they think that we can do, how do I want to say that? They put us here for a reason. So I don't want the reason any of you are here to be stifled in any way, taking that away from the people that put you in your position. So I think, again, exactly what Britt and Rachel both have said. I think we can all work together, and being able to work the way that we work will help us all work together by not feel like you're being hamstrung. So I agree with what you have there, and I don't have any issues with anything in this policy as far as what can and can't be done, and keeping those boundaries.
basically we can get the job of the school board, and that is our students and our staff, do that in the best way we can. We're not, like Matt said, we're not going to agree on everything. But the thing is, and that's why we come down to a vote, and that we want to make sure that people that have something to say, they get an opportunity to say it. There will be a vote, but along with those things, and the base of all of that is not only by Iowa law, Iowa code, and what we voted on, there's a certain set of ethics that have to be followed that's a little bit different than if you were at McDonald's eating a sandwich and disagreeing with somebody. And I think that's what makes us work the way that we do and the way that we have passed and done in the past. And hopefully that's the way that we're going to strive for the future.
Thank you.
Because I know that's one thing that we all agree on, is that we're here for students and staff. And how we get there is important, but we have to do it with some ethics, some dignity of the way the people voted us in. And that's all I've got to say.
Sandra, do you have anything?
I'm glad that we updated things. I think it's probably a little bit better representative of us as we are today. And I think if all of us go in the spirit of doing the best we can to follow it and not to get too carried away on our own front and what we personally feel, but to think of the district as a whole and how it's important that we work together, I think we should be able to move forward quite well. Nicely said.
Melissa, did you have any?
Yeah, so I left the last board meeting really conflicted because obviously there is a lot of divide in the district. Obviously there are a lot of things that we would all like to change about that. I came into this role wanting to find ways to restore some unity, and I think that so there's some value to having a unified voice from the board, but I also think there's some great danger in that. And so following the last board meeting, I've had conversations with several board members, several community members about that conversation, and I just was really, really uneasy with it. I think that it's incredibly dangerous for us to say that we as individual board members cannot speak up for what we believe is right for kids and what is best for kids. And I think that we need to be able to do that. I think that whether it's in saying who, like, I think that there's just lots of different situations in which Sandra and I might disagree on something, and we might both think that there's something that's best for kids, and we both have the right to be able to say that. And I think that that's okay. I think that that's healthy. And those issues might not always come to a vote, and we might not always have the opportunity to say that at the board table. But I don't think that there's a danger in us being able to share that out in the community. As long as we're doing it in a respectful way, and I'm not out there saying, Sandra's this, you know what. I think that we can be respectful, professional board members who are representing the district in a positive way, and also being emissaries for advocating for our kids in the best way that we believe we can. And so I think that having a code of ethics that we're following, and also giving us the freedoms to be able to advocate in the best ways that we know how is really important.
So in summary, I think we're all in agreement. We have consensus on the basics of following our code of ethics, but not policing communication responses and things like that. There still is the pieces of our code of ethics that state once a decision is made, we support as a board. So there is that piece of it. And then the media designation, which that was upheld by our lawyer. So those two are really the only sticking points that I would have, is that when we make a decision as a board, even if you voted no, once it's out there, you can't bash it. But beyond that, at this table and before that, all opinions, all points of discussion are welcome. And that's one of my goals in this position that you've put me in, is to make sure that everyone is heard when we are having those discussions. So,
Can I ask you, can you clarify the media designation?
Yeah.
What you mean by that?
that the district has a designated media response person, and that would be Shannon.
Okay, so for an example, because I just want to make sure I understand this correctly, if a media outlet reached out to individual board members asking for a comment, are they able, because, you know, we had discussed
Okay,
this, so if you say, so
Can I
if you
just say, I'll just review the policy and then you can see if there's still questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the policy in place is that the district has a designated media contact, and that would be Shannon or someone he would designate on his behalf, and that for the board, that is the president. If you are contacted by the media on an official capacity, you would refer to the board statement if one has been provided, or to Shannon. If you respond yourself, it cannot be as a board member, it has to be a personal opinion. But that is the only framework in which you would have to say that. That's the only caveat, is the media part. Because we've got a designated, that's in policy.
Right.
And that's consistent with our procedures for staff as well. So
Now,
that's,
you know, a month ago when we had this conversation, it was leaning towards no one should ever speak to the media. And I'm not saying that. If you want to speak, you just have to clarify it's your personal opinion. You're not speaking on behalf of the board.
Correct, okay.
That's the difference with the media part.
Well, I was a little confused when you said you're not speaking as a board member.
I'm sorry, you're not speaking on behalf of the board.
Okay.
But you can speak to media, you have to clarify that you're not speaking on behalf of the board.
Yes.
Okay, because I think part of my question was, like, for example, during campaign season, I was speaking to the media all the time, and if I were to run again, or, you know, in 2 years, I assume there will be some board members who will be running again, they will want to speak to media, and they are a board member.
That was the exact conversation we had in policy committee.
Okay.
So
they have full rights to be able to speak to the media and identify themselves as a board member.
as long as they clarify that their position is not that of the entire board.
Yes, okay.
And that if they want the district opinion or the district statement, they should contact Shannon.
Perfect.
In most cases, I would still refer them to me or to Britt as board president, as a spokesperson for the board or the district on those pieces.
And if you ever get questions, you know, part of that policy states that Shannon or I are together, we can create a statement from the district that then everyone can use if we need specific information about a specific topic. So,
but they're usually in those situations, they're usually asking for your own opinions on things. Just
well, I mean,
your
if you need to
stances.
reference facts or something,
sure.
you know, sometimes the question is very vague and you might want to reference a certain statistic before giving your whatever. Anyway, those are the only two things. I also wanted to follow up on two other things that were part of that conversation. I already talked about it being lawyer reviewed. The chain of command chart is in progress. I've seen the rough draft. It looks very good.
Great.
I'm excited when it becomes more than a rough draft, and that should be soon because it looks good. So that I wanted to say is in progress. And then in terms of, I don't want board members to feel, just like I don't want to restrain a board member from responding to a constituent communication, I also don't want to make board members feel obligated because I know Barry's not here, but he was very forthcoming with his opinion on why he doesn't respond to emails. So my suggestion, and with board consensus, I would like to update our webpage and make it more informative about what board communications look like so that there is a clear community expectation of what they may or may not receive in response to board. And that would, when the chain of command chart, it would be linked there when it's done. Just be more informative about our communication process on our website, rather than trying to create templates or do any of that kind of stuff. Just right where they're going to get the link to email all of us is a better clarification of what communication with the board looks like. So is that?
Can you
thoughts on
clarify
that?
what the expectations would
I don't know.
include? Like something to the effect of, if an email is sent to all board members, you can expect a response from either the superintendent or the board president, for example, something to that effect? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
My thought was, does everyone agree that that a web update would be good, and then we'll draft something and bring it back to the next meeting?
Sure.
Or share it out?
Sure.
I don't want you to say, yeah, go
Yeah.
do something. I want to share what it, but I don't
Yeah.
know what it would say.
I think it'd be nice to have some minimum expectations or just a general idea of what people.
I don't want board members who defer to Shannon to respond, to continue to get, community feedback that they never respond if there's a reason for them not responding. Just like I don't want anyone to feel like because they're responding, they're getting negative feedback. So is that something that everyone is okay with us working on as part of this? Awesome. In that case, I would entertain a motion to approve the operations manual as
Can
discussed.
I just for clarification,
Oh,
because
yeah.
I know the question, I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
The one change that is made in here, where it's struck out for the example, endorsing other board member candidates for school board elections, that's in there, it was crossed out. Can you just clarify, so everyone knows that that is still probably, I'm assuming, not within, or code of ethics to do that? It's crossed out because it was replaced with something else then?
So one of the reasons it was crossed out is because it's the only example of policy that's in the manual. But
Okay.
we don't give examples everywhere else.
Okay.
The other, and you guys jump in on this, so it's definitely in the code of ethics that we do not disparage one another. We do not, go out and post or say, man, Melissa really ticked me off tonight, and let me just tell you all about it. We're not going to do that. That's not ethical. That's not our professional duty. In terms of informal endorsements, there was some concern that that might be a step too far in restricting your ability to do that. So
Yeah, the other thing we talked about that time with the policy committee was to do a little more digging on what technically, legally can and can't be done, and so we're still in that process too. So I think that could be brought back to the policy group for consideration as well, so. in
And
this
Matt,
case,
I'll
examples is
share,
being removed.
yeah, I'll share with you as someone who's on the policy committee that, to me, that was a free speech issue. I really was concerned that it possibly infringed on free speech, and, I talked with you about a number of the things, and this was just one of them. So for me, I think, acting within, the code of ethics, we should be allowed to share our respectful opinion.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I could say personally, I will probably never endorse formally another candidate, because the reason that line's in there is because we all, no matter who gets elected, we have to work with each other. And so if it becomes a mudslinging election cycle, this is supposed to be a nonpartisan community servant kind of thing. So I understand why past boards had that line in there as an example. But it would be nice to be able to respond to topics, not people. So I know it just, so that's part of it. But for me, like Shannon said, we're looking into the specifics of how that works, but it was the only example in the manual. It just doesn't, it sticks out like, why is this one thing here? Why are we calling just this one thing out?
And that's actually why I
Yeah.
brought it up, is because just seeing that it could get misconstrued one way or the other.
Yeah.
So that clarification is exactly what I was looking for. So.
Well, my thoughts are, we're the only elected officials that
for whatever, like every other elected official that I know at any other level of government makes endorsements for the candidates. Yes, they still have to work together, but we also, we're a governing body, and we have, again, kind of goes back to that we should have the right to be able to speak up for what we believe is best for our kids. We are in a role that we're trying to do what we believe is going to improve our schools, and if we know someone that we think is going to come in and do a great job for our schools, we should be able to say, hey, we think this person would be a great person to fill this open seat. I don't see.
It does create.
I know it creates some muddy waters,
Well,
but
I was going to say it does create a lopsided. If you're not on the board and you're running, you can endorse and partner with anyone, and if you are on the board and you're running for re-election, you really can't say anything.
yeah.
So it's very muddy, and it didn't seem to need to be there. So now I hope that, in 2 years, we don't all start chanting for each other. But
I
again,
did have a couple
you do
other
you.
little things in here that I wanted to just bring up real quick. On page, sorry, I'm on the wrong thing. Nope, sorry, just never mind me.
Okay. I move to approve the board operations manual as discussed.
I second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We will get an updated draft, or an updated final copy, and then we'll all sign it at the next meeting. Does that work? Because we all have to sign that signature page or whatever. So, right? Is that still on here somewhere? This isn't the right thing.
It's just blank right now, so.
Okay. New business.
I make a motion to approve the 2022-2023 at-risk dropout prevention modified supplemental application in the amount of $1,369,390, and for this amount to be submitted to the School Budget Review Committee for consideration of increased spending authority.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I make a motion to approve the Artsonia fundraiser request from Bowman Woods Elementary.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And I apologize, Kevin. The at-risk dropout motion was made by Rachel and seconded by Sandra, and the fundraiser was motioned by Rachel and seconded by Clark.
I make a motion to approve the first reading of the policy recommendations as presented.
Second.
Is that Sandra?
Yes.
Okay. So motion by Rachel, second by Sandra. Any discussion?
This I did have a couple things on. Just a minor edit on page 51 should read exists, not exits.
Thank you, Melissa.
Good catch.
And then I was wondering, so I know that there was some discussion on audience communications, and wondering whether or not there was discussion within the policy committee around having audience members sign in prior to the meeting. I know that that was a request that I had heard from some audience members, just to ensure that they had an opportunity to speak, and that they knew what order they were going in, and that they felt like that might help them with the
We did talk about it.
ease of it.
And we have a draft that Shannon's going to share with the board for feedback before we put any, we didn't want to just draft it, and we wanted everyone's input on that, so he's going to share something out.
Hopefully by this Friday you'll have it.
Yeah,
Great.
so we're trying to get it out a better way.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion on the policies? All right. Motion by Rachel, second by Sandra. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I make a motion to,
Motion to approve the open enrollment request as presented.
second.
Any discussion? Motion by Clark, second by Rachel. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? Motion by Melissa, second by Sandra. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We move on to board communications. So I wanted to just mention that our next board meeting, we will have a closed session following for Shannon's mid-year review. You each were given an envelope with his goals and the new evaluation form. So if you could each complete that form and get it back to me, I need the physical copy or a scanned copy by next Monday so that I can create a summary and get that to Shannon so he has a week. And then he will also be doing the same thing, and at the end of the week, he'll get us. So that's I promise I won't give homework all the time, but if you could complete that, that will aid in that discussion at our next meeting.
By when? You said by when?
Next Monday, 1 week. Thank you. I don't know dates unless I look. So board calendar. So looks like we have some committee meetings coming up. So Marion City Council, I know Rachel, you're already on for January 20th. Does that still work?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Marion City Council on February 3rd. Any takers?
Check.
We all get out our
I can
calendars.
probably take that on. I feel like some other people have really taken on a number of them, so I am happy to take that on as well.
How about the 17th?
I'll do that.
All right. So we've got Rachel on February 3rd and Matt on February 17th. We have some board visits coming up, which will be exciting. Wilkins at the end of January, and then Echo Hill in the beginning of February. I know Gayla and Shannon sent out an update that the Marion City, State of the City, is not on here anymore. It got postponed. So if you can follow up, if you haven't already, with Gayla on if you can attend or not, that would be great. Do you want to talk about Day on the Hill?
I haven't looked at it too much yet. I know we got the flyer today, I believe it was, as far as the Day on the Hill. Today is the first day of the legislative session, so we'll start to give you updates on that every Friday as well. I have not dug into Day on the Hill yet, schedule-wise, to see what that looks like too much yet. I don't know
It's 9 to 4. That's all I know.
Yeah.
Training in the morning, and
Yeah.
then session.
And it's varied in quality over the years, so I'm curious what the structure is this year, so we'll do a little more digging into it now that we have the specific schedule, and throw something out to board this week and see if you have any interest in. I'm not opposed to going, I just want to make sure it's worth everybody's time too as well.
Well, and not everybody has to go, so don't feel compelled.
Correct, thank you.
I mean, I have an event I have to run that day, and unless I can get out of it, I wouldn't be able to go. And then the second quarter Compass celebration on the 20th.
Yeah, and that's not really a board schedule necessarily, but the couple celebrations are just kind of unique and kind of fun too, so you're just welcome to attend if you're able to or want to. So don't feel guilted if you can't make it. Just have that as
What is this?
It's the second item on the list there.
10 a.m.
Oh, okay. I was looking down in the
10 a.m.
lower portion.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Does anyone have anything for the good of the cause? Any communications or comments or anything you want to say?
Yeah, God, that was a long meeting.
Oh, we're not done yet.
So I would like to congratulate our show choirs. They had their first competition on Saturday. They met at the high school at 3:30 a.m. and they got home at 2 a.m. and they all placed first in their division.
Wow.
And 10th Street are the grand champions. They won the whole thing. So I just thought that was pretty cool. And
Well, of course they did.
so, and if you want to check them out, Supernova is this weekend. So you can spend all day being sung and danced at.
Yeah.
So that's all I had.
Okay, I move to adjourn this meeting at, what time?
At 8:39.
8:39.
Second.
Okay.
I have to ask for discussion. Does anyone want to discuss it? Okay, motion by Sandra, second by Rachel. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. We are adjourned.